Well, welcome everybody. I'm Ellie Cohen, CEO of the Climate Center. It's fantastic to see you all here. Let's give ourselves a big hand. So it's great to have you all here for the 2023 California Climate Policy Summit. It's inspiring to have so many climate activists and leaders from all over the state, representing environmental groups, environmental justice organizations, local government, faith and healthcare communities, business and labor. Am I missing any key categories? Okay, just want to be sure you're listening. Okay. Media. It's great to have you here, and it's fantastic to be focused together on policy to be sure we enact the bold policies required to secure a livable future for us all. I want to first just acknowledge, if you are a staff member or a board member or a volunteer of the Climate Center, would you please raise your hand? Let's give them a big round of applause for the huge amount of work everybody did to pull this off. Thank you so much. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge any elected officials who are in the room. I know that Senator Becker is standing over here. Are there any other elected officials who are here right now? We have a number of others coming. Yeah. It looks like you're representing elected officials. Well, and we know that without their incredible service, that policy does not happen. So let's give Senator Becker and all electeds one more hand. Thank you. So I'm sure you all saw the news. A couple weeks ago, the latest United Nations science report came out, and it's pretty clear. It shares what we've all known for a long time, which is that climate change is getting worse, it's deadly, and it's caused by burning fossil fuels. So the UN Secretary General Guterres said after the release of the report that it is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and every time frame. He said, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. Even the very conservative International Energy Agency says, knowing what we know today about what's happening with climate change, is that we cannot build any new oil, gas, and coal infrastructure. Yet, in 2022, emissions were the highest ever globally. And even with everything we know, the United States is the #1 in the world with plans to build more oil and gas, including fracking. Boo is right. And California, let's just be really clear. California permitted over 900 new oil and gas wells just since January, and almost 600 of those are within the health and safety zones we all passed into law last year that are now suspended because of big oil's lies. 600 new oil and gas wells permitted near kids and near schools since January. This is unacceptable. It is unacceptable. The good news is that we have the solutions. We have the solutions. We know what we need to do. We know how to achieve equitable, accelerated climate policy. We just need the political will by more than our climate champions like Senator Becker. We know that investing big time now and cutting fossil fuel pollution saves lives and dollars. Fortunately, there are now positive tipping points. Solar is the cheapest form of power globally. Renewables provided more power than coal in the US last year for the first time ever. Building new solar and wind is cheaper than operating fossil fuel plants. And then for those of you from LA, the city of LA, LA County, and Culver City are phasing out oil and gas wells. We have here today some representatives from the San Francisco Bay Area Air Quality Management District that just did what? Come on, people, this is one of the biggest accomplishments in policy in the last...
Adopted zero-emission space and water heating rules.
There you go. Zero-emission space and water heating rules, and basically banned new replacement gas furnaces and water heaters. Let's give them a hand again. Thank you very much. It's huge. There are 75 cities in California now that require all electric new buildings, and Sonoma County has even banned new gas stations. So it's happening. It is happening, but we know we have to do a lot more, a lot sooner. Every bit of warming matters. So when they talk about 1.5, and today we're roughly at around 1.2 C warming, every tenth of a degree, you can think of it like the earthquake scale. Each tenth of a degree means much worse impacts for all of us and for life as we know it. So every action we take to reduce it is huge and significant. The prescription from the 2018 1.5 C report still holds, and probably we need to do even more, to cut emissions in half by 2030 and draw down past climate pollution to have a chance at securing a safe climate. That means we in California have to enact bold, ambitious policies and actually implement them in ways that do not cause further harm to our frontline communities already burdened by fossil fuel pollution and climate change. We know that bold goals work. We've seen it again and again. We know that as goes California, goes the world. We can demonstrate it, we can move it forward at speed and scale, and we can do it equitably. The Climate Center is very proud to be sponsoring Senate Bill 12 from Senator Henry Stern to increase the state's emissions reduction target up from 40% to at least 55% by 2030. This is a bill that was almost passed by, yes, let's give it a hand. Thank you to Senator Stern. This bill almost passed last August. It was part of Governor Newsom's climate pillars, but it lost by just a handful of votes. But think about it. The United Kingdom has a goal of 68% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The EU has a goal of 62% cuts. We haven't even been able to get anywhere near the 40% goal that we need to do. We have to do more. For us to get, for the whole world to get to what the UN climate scientists are saying we need to do, we need California to stand up. We need California to lead with even more ambitious policies so we can unleash innovation, send those market signals, bring in much more private sector investment, and make climate solutions affordable for everyone. 2045 is simply too late for carbon neutrality. And there are lots and lots of benefits for equitably accelerating emissions reductions. There was a report from E3 a year and a half ago that shows that California could save $44 billion a year and prevent nearly 5,000 deaths every year from fossil fuel pollution by rapidly phasing out oil and gas use in buildings and transportation. So let's do it. Stopping fossil fuels, rapidly transitioning to true renewables, including much more distributed energy, and doing it in ways that improve air and water quality, especially in frontline communities. We know how to do this. We need both to establish targets aligned with the science and to implement at speed and scale. This legislative session, there are bills to do both in addition to SB 12, and I'm just going to highlight a few. Senator Skinner's bill, SB 233, which is sponsored by the Climate Center, requires virtually all new EVs sold in California to be capable of bi-directional charging by 2027. This will be a key unlock to keep the power on as we face more and more extreme events. In fact, my 2019 Nissan Leaf is out on the parking lot here to demonstrate how this can work. And you can see, like, my car was one of 40,000 electric vehicles last September that was not used to help ensure that we didn't have blackouts and to get us through that major heat wave. But the potential is enormous. Another bill, Senator Scott Wiener's Corporate Climate Accountability Bill 253. Let's give a hand for that. That's co-sponsored by California Environmental Voters, the Greenlining Institute series, Carbon Accountable, Sunrise Bay Area. It requires businesses doing $1 billion or more in revenue and that operate here in California to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions annually, and it has some teeth to it to hold them accountable. This is essential. Senator Lena Gonzalez's bill, SB 556, would establish new health protection zones where oil and gas production facilities and wells are located, 3,200 feet between schools, health centers, and homes. It would make the operators or owners of these liable for the kinds of illnesses that people get from being exposed to this pollution every single day. So respiratory ailments, preterm birth, high-risk pregnancies, and cancer. Isn't this how it should be? This is how it should be. Let's give a big hand of applause to Senator Gonzalez and her leadership on that. Another bill by Senator Gonzalez is SB 252 that requires that CalPERS and CalSTRS divest from fossil fuels. Let's use our dollars to do the right thing. And Senator Becker has a number of bills, but I'll highlight just one right now, SB 49, which would provide tax breaks for solar parking lot canopies, which is huge. We need much more of that, so thank you, Senator Becker. Today, you're going to have the opportunity to learn about these and many other great pieces of legislation worthy of your active support, but we're also going to learn about some things that we all together need to oppose. We also will have panels on policy and climate health impacts, the appropriate role for green hydrogen, and how we can reform California's cap-and-trade program. It's going to be a great day. Now, I want to remind us all in our political work, there are wins and there are losses. We know that we have to keep at it, never give up, keep doing the hard work. We see what's happening around the country. Racism and fascism are on display in places like Tennessee, shutting down those speaking for democracy and for environmental justice. We here in California have to show what real democracy means for our collective future. It means working together in unprecedented partnership. We know we can only achieve a carbon negative and equity positive future by working together. Together, we can overcome the insidious influence of big oil and big utilities on California's policymaking. Working together, we can amplify our power. This is what this summit is really about. We can dramatically cut climate pollution. We can start phasing out fossil fuels. We can vastly increase the deployment of solar and wind, including local-scale solar and storage. We can ensure that clean water and air, improved health and access, and we can ensure access for everyone for climate solutions, and we can work with nature to draw down past climate pollution while also enhancing biodiversity, food and water security, and resilience. There is no other option. Working together, we must and will secure a climate-safe future for all. Thank you so much for being here. Senator Becker, if you'd come up. Well, I'm really pleased that Senator Becker could join us today. He is one of our leading climate champions in the legislature. He represents California's 13th Senate District, which includes San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. He hit the ground running on climate change in the state Senate. He's the author of multiple bills focused on accelerating California's transition to 100% clean energy. Last year, he passed a bill to accelerate the path to decarbonizing the building sector and a bill to decarbonize cement, a huge contributor to climate pollution. He chairs the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Resources, Environmental Protection, and Energy, as well as the Senate Subcommittee on the Clean Energy Future. And I'm sure in the not too distant future, he'll be chairing a number of other key committees that will make a difference for the goals that we are all working towards. He's a busy guy doing amazing things. Let's give it up for Senator Josh Becker.
Let's hear it for Ellie. Who's fired up to be in Sacramento? Let's stand up if you're ready for urgent climate action. Let's stand up today for urgent climate action. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's the energy that we need. And I'm so glad you're here. And Ellie fit me in because I have two bills I'm presenting at 9:30. But Ellie fit me in because I feel like I had to be here because this is exactly what we need. Because I'll try in 5 minutes to make the case for California focus, California urgency, because we have a lot of great things that we've done. Last year, many people regard as the biggest year ever in California for climate legislation, which is fantastic. But it's still a battle every day, as I'll talk about in a moment. But for me, I ran for office on this issue. I helped start clean tech for Obama with probably some folks here in 2007. And when we won in 2008, we had the green stimulus. We had, did some good things, the green stimulus, other things, but saw how hard it is to make impact at the federal level, how hard it is to make impact. And now, especially with a Republican House, the Senate at the federal level is going to be a real struggle going forward. We all have to tremendous focus. There's going to be a huge year coming up, despite the very great midterms. And so it's going to really be leading edge climate states that are going to have to move the ball forward. California, Washington State, Colorado, New York, we have to keep pushing the envelope. And that's why I ran. We're the fourth largest economy of the world. If we were our own state, we'd be our own country, we'd be the fourth largest economy in the world. There's only 40 people in the Senate. There's 80 in the Assembly. This is a very, it's a very small world up here, for those of you who know it well, and which means you can influence and you can have a huge effect by being here. But it's needed, right? And I'm just going to be honest with you. I'll give you an example from, say, yesterday. So I have another bill on building performance standards. It's wonky, but basically, this is the biggest thing for big buildings, which are 20 million metric tons of CO2 in California. Buildings over 50,000 square feet, 20 million metric tons of CO2 every year. It's 5% of our emissions. And we have Colorado, Washington State. We have 8 cities like New York City that have a building performance standard that will set standards, benchmark, and then reduce over time. And yesterday, I had to pull out residential out of my building performance standard. Every building performance standard in the country has residential in there. I had to pull it out because of just influence from interests and didn't have support from the church. I had to pull out water. We were going to be the first one ever to have water. Again, the same thing, do benchmarking, reduce over time. I had to pull it out. So these are things, these are real world examples. You know, we had yesterday as well, the chair had a bill, gas utilities get certain allowances. When they sell them, they have to do certain things, basically requiring they have to give it all back to consumers. Not a bad thing. But in the past, that was used $50 million for Senator Stern for the Build Tech that was used to buy heat pumps. Now, because I was the only one to vote against it, we had to, you know, all that money has to go back. So it's a battle every day up here. That's like the point I want to make. You don't remember all the details, but it is a battle every day here. And we need your help. We need your support. And it's folks like the Climate Center that are leading on policy, but also leading on implementation. Because at the end of the day, none of this will get passed and none of it will work unless we actually implement. So nature-based solutions for climate. Again, we can pass the laws here, but ultimately we need to get farmers to buy in. We need to show that it's working and it's synergistic, and that's what the Climate Center does. We actually does webinars when we do building electrification. Again, and I have many bills on that this year. When we do building electrification, it's great, but we also have to show that it's working out in the field and get people telling stories about their buildings and what they're doing, and get the contractors and everyone, and that's what the Climate Center is doing. There's all these people from the Climate Center I've only met on webinars in the past, only on Zoom. So I'm meeting them in person here for the first time outside of Zoom land. So I just couldn't be more excited that you all are here, because there are a bunch of us, and you heard about some of the bills. We're pushing very hard. I have bills on cow burps and cow flatulence this year because, that's agriculture, 7% of our carbon emissions. I have a bill on carbon removal, because ultimately we have to remove carbon from the atmosphere as well. That's 15%. That's 70 million metric tons to get to net zero, according to CARB, by every year by 2045. So we need to create a market for that. We need to work on buildings and solar canopy and all these things we talk about. So just couldn't be more excited to have you here. We need you here. We're doing some amazing work, and I see Lauren here, the governor just really came on at the end of last year, and we got some amazing bills passed. And as I mentioned, many people feel it's the best, most impactful year for legislation in California history. Some of that was goal setting, some of that was implementation, but now we have to fill in all the gaps in all these areas. So just couldn't be more excited to be here to support the Climate Center and to look out in this audience and have all of you here today standing up for urgent climate action. Thank you.
Working on the front lines. Thank you, Senator Josh Becker. And now, Lauren, would you please come up? And Lauren, she won't like when I say this, but she's the woman behind the man. So when we heard what Senator Becker just said about what happened last year, this woman was working 24 hours a day those last few days of session and made so much happen that we thought impossible just a couple months before. So one more hand for Lauren Sanchez. But I'm going to do a formal introduction. Okay. Wait. No, I'd like to share some of this because I think it's really incredible to have someone like Lauren in the position that she's in our state. Lauren is a true climate hero, in my opinion. She is Governor Newsom's senior advisor for climate, making big strides forward on climate action and climate justice. Before this position, Lauren served as senior advisor to Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry. And prior to joining the Biden-Harris administration, she served as Deputy Secretary for Climate Policy and Intergovernmental Relations at Cal EPA and International Policy Director at CARB. Lauren was a climate negotiator with the State Department and served on the Paris Agreement negotiation team. That was huge. That was one of the things that gave me a lot of hope and made me want to come to the Climate Center and do the work that I'm doing. Lauren is a Fulbright scholar and earned a Master of Environmental Management degree at Yale University. She lives in Oakland, tries to spend as much time as possible wandering the Sierra Mountains, and enjoys trying all the Bay Area's greatest tacos while perfecting her Selena karaoke. We'd like to hear some of that. Let's give a warm welcome to Lauren Sanchez.
Thanks so much, Ellie. I'll spare you all the karaoke, I have to say. It's not what you all signed up for on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a little intimidating going after one of our great climate champions in the Senate, Senator Becker, and the energy and enthusiasm he brings to this agenda. Before I dive in, I just have to give an amazing amount of kudos to Ellie and everyone working at the Climate Center. Yes, thank you. This job is incredibly intimidating. I don't know if you all feel that working in California on climate change, that failure is not an option. The entire world is watching what we are doing here, setting goals, implementing them, and my job wouldn't be possible without partnership and leadership and vision and accountability from people like Ellie and so many of you in the room. So thank you for the work you all are doing. We have done an incredible amount together. I think that's the real message I wanted to bring to this room today. I am feeling an incredible amount of hope here at the beginning of 2023. We are just on the cusp of having 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles here in the state of California. That's a goal that was set for 2025, and we will maybe achieve 2 years earlier. Last year, we were able to run the entire electric grid on 100% clean energy for some blips of time. There are all these proof points to what we're doing that reverberate around the nation and around the world. Again, I can't impress upon each and every one of you how many phone calls I get from climate advisors in other states, in other countries, in the White House who are saying, how did California think about this? What obstacles are you seeing? How can we learn and do even better? And one of the things I continue to impress upon them is something you hear often from Governor Newsom. He quotes an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that is the spirit I try to bring to my role in the governor's office. I don't have all of the answers. This issue requires an incredible amount of humility. Across the state of California, our farmers and our local leaders and our tribal partners have the answers in terms of what our climate agenda needs to look like for the world's fourth largest economy. And it is such an honor and a privilege to be here working with all of you and try to bring the best ideas possible to the state's capital and make sure that we are pushing on them as hard as we possibly can. As Ellie knows, one of our, there were two big things that I was proud of last year that we did in partnership with Ellie, the coalition, and the legislature. The first being our now $48 billion climate budget. Yeah. You like an applause track. And this was pretty remarkable. When I came to California in 2017, you all may remember, we were spending tens of millions of dollars on our climate investment programs. And when the state was faced with a budget surplus the order of magnitude that we were. The governor sat down and said, Lauren, we need a climate budget that finally matches this crisis with the urgency and the scale of investment that is required. And we were so lucky to be able to do that with the legislature last year. We're spending $10 billion on ZEVs and water and fighting wildfire and clean energy, and just about every part of our agenda is now getting a historic amount of investment, and we're so incredibly proud of the work that has gone into that, and now trying to get the money out the door. And here's kind of my first ask: as we're implementing those programs, please help us do so in a way that is most effective from carbon reduction and from local community benefits. The state is incredibly proud. Our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, over its history, over half of those investments have gone to disadvantaged communities. A big part of our equity and environmental justice agenda will continue to be making sure those investments are benefiting the communities on the front lines of this crisis. I will say, it was also, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Is that yeah, thank you. 54 billion in California, now 48 with our budget fiscal situation. And then we watched the federal government deliver another $370 billion through the Inflation Reduction Act last year. So my second ask, as we are getting our hands around the billions of dollars that Congress has now appropriated to this crisis, the existential issue of our time, making sure that California, our communities and tribes, state government, the private sector are able to get as much of those funds as possible and bring them to California. Certainly one of our top goals for the next year as we continue to see record investments in clean hydrogen and transmission upgrades and water storage. So really, really excited to work on that with all of you. As Senator Becker mentioned, we had the thrill of the last few weeks of session last year working on our climate legislative package. I am thankful every day to work for a boss and in the governor who is so wholly committed to this issue and who said to us at the end of session, California has fallen behind in terms of the global race of ambition. And he worked with the legislature and with so many stakeholders around the state to bring across the finish line those bills that advance carbon neutrality and nature-based solutions, carbon capture, accelerated our clean energy targets to 90% by 2035, and a whole suite of goals that we pulled across the finish line. And on September 1st, at the end of session, I woke up and was like, oh, wow, we have a lot more work to do together. And as you all know, California is not just in the business of setting these ambitious goals, and some of them are very scary. I remember penning the ZEV executive order with the governor and saying, there were so many people around the state and around the world who said you can't end gas-powered vehicles. You can't end the tailpipe. And look at how far we've come in the last 4 years in terms of our zero-emission transportation future. It is here. The feds are following us tomorrow, not quite the level of ambition, but they're doing their part. We have over half the country's ZEVs here in the state. We set goals, we develop regulations, we dedicate the funding and investments and incentives that are necessary, and we achieve them. And that is why I'm so incredibly proud to work in the state, have amazing partners like Ellie and everyone in this room. It's not, we walk the walk day in and day out, and it's incredibly hard. I am kept up at night at the amount of infrastructure we have to deploy in this state on the time frame that is mind-boggling. For those of you that dug into the scoping plan modeling that CARB did last year, the numbers are terrifying. But they're mostly inspirational. And we have no other choice but to dedicate our hearts and minds and every ounce of energy to this issue. And there are so many willing partners across the state who want to do it with us. And it's, again, an honor and an inspiration to be here with you all. I will say there are some days when I wake up tired of fighting. I felt incredibly hopeful gaveling in the Paris Agreement as well, Ellie. And then early in this job, I went up to see the Caldor fire and did not feel as hopeful. we in California are lucky to have an incredible amount of public support and political support for this agenda because Californians are living the impacts of climate change every single day. And if I could leave you with one thought, it would be, who else do we need on this journey with us? There are so many incredible partners in the room and around the state who are dedicated to this agenda. But as we know, climate isn't just an environmental issue, it's an economic and social justice issue. And it really is about the livability and the future of this state and of our economy. We need youth and moms and farmers and laborers, and it's an all of society effort, and it's an all of society agenda that the governor is excited to continue ushering in and implementing with all of you as partners. So thank you, Ellie, for having me. For those of you that don't have my contact info, I will share it because my favorite part of the day is being able to talk to Californians who are excited about this issue and who want to do everything they can to help us save the planet and save the state. So thank you, and I think I have time for a question.
Yes, several.
Oh, several.
So you all have on your table index cards, and I was supposed to say this before introducing Lauren, but please fill them out, and there's some volunteers going to come around and pick them up, and if there are any that are already filled out, maybe you can bring them up here. But I'm going to start with a challenging question for you, Lauren.
Love it.
Let me speak into the mic. Is this on? Yeah.
Where's the coffee?
So you talked, in just a few minutes, you talked about some of the different things that we'll be funding, and one of them is what you called clean hydrogen. Can you talk some about what are the challenges, how you define clean hydrogen, what you think the challenges are, and what you see going forward with that in terms of the governor's policies?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I will say, I'll point to an application the state submitted on Friday, ARCHES, for the Federal Hydrogen Hub funding. GoBiz worked with a public-private partnership and over 200 different members of a coalition to submit the state's application for bringing up to $1.25 billion in federal funding for hydrogen to the state. And if you look under the hood of that application, not only did we have support from tribes and labor and community groups and industry, but we explicitly said that renewable hydrogen for the purposes of these projects do not include things like biogas, are produced with renewable power, are focused on those hard to decarbonize areas, mostly going to heavy duty transportation and ports, some specific power projects. We put a number of guardrails in terms of policy that have been under discussion for many years here in California, and we think that it makes our application that much stronger. Every state is applying for federal hydrogen funding, and a number of them are using natural gas to produce that hydrogen. Or, did I hear a boo? Well, not everyone is blessed with the sun and the renewable grid that we are. So I think, we will continue to discuss across the agencies and the administration where hydrogen makes the most sense, how it's produced, who's procuring it, how it's moved around the state. But I think our ARCHES application was certainly us leaning forward and saying only the cleanest hydrogen produced and for the best uses are, our vision going forward.
That's great. Thank you. We actually have about 12 more minutes for Q&A. Sorry, Lauren. We're going to put you on the spot here, but thank you for demonstrating. No, I was just handed this one.
Okay.
Okay. Could you talk more about what's been happening with the issuance of drilling permits? I think I mentioned maybe before you came in that there are almost 600 new oil and gas well permits that have been issued within 3,200 feet of sensitive receptors, homes and schools. What is the administration doing to rein this in?
So one of the first visits I did in this job was down to the community of Wilmington, where if you haven't all visited, you should absolutely go. A community of color down in SoCal where there has been neighborhood drilling for generations and where generations of Californians have been fighting the oil drilling happening next to daycares and schools and hospitals. This was a few years ago when I came into this job, and we were really excited to work with our oil and gas regulator, CalGEM, on a strong public health rulemaking that would essentially establish a health and safety buffer around which there wouldn't be that drilling. We were really fortunate to work closely with Senator Lena Gonzalez last year in the climate package, who, is she coming? She's a great climate warrior. She will be here. Okay, she'll tell you about the battle later, but she eagerly came to the table on the climate package in August and said, let's pursue this health and safety buffer, the 3,200-foot setbacks, through legislation and make them incredibly durable. And this is, as many of you know, legislation that has failed in the state legislature over the recent years. We were excited to partner with her, again, and so many community groups that have been fighting this battle for decades, and get enough votes to get that out of the legislature. It was one of the governor's proudest bills he signed last year. And then shortly thereafter, as you all probably know, the oil industry raised enough money to put it onto the ballot. I love the sound effects in this crew, I have to say. Thank you. That referendum qualified. And I can't, actually, Ellie, I don't know how much I'm supposed to talk about the referendum. In my personal capacity, I can't tell you how disappointing that was to see. We had worked so hard to get that bill done, and the moment of celebration was decades in the making, and now we are committed or the governor in his personal capacity is very committed to fighting that referendum and making sure that as it goes on to the ballot, Californians don't choose a future where there is daycare drilling, and that going forward we're able to implement that law, because right now it is stayed, and make sure that we are able to usher in the public health and safety protections that are necessary.
Thank you so much. Okay, could you talk some about energy equity? Like EVs and building electrification is very expensive, and how can we ensure that renters and those in multifamily housing and lower income communities can afford it?
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics. When I first came to the state, again, about 6 years ago, we looked at the data in terms of the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, the state's biggest ZEV incentive, and looked at the economics of who was using that rebate program and found that disproportionately higher income Californians were using it, mostly to buy expensive vehicles. And I couldn't be more proud of the work that the legislature has done in partnership with us and the Air Board and our GoBiz teams to really make sure we have a comprehensive set of equity-focused incentives for zero-emission vehicles. So when you look at the package that the governor and legislature did for ZEVs last year, about $9 billion, you'll see we specifically pushed for incentives for the Clean Cars for All program and for ZEV financing and loan options, again, specifically targeting lower income Californians and making sure that they can get into cleaner vehicles as well. We also dedicated almost $1 billion for what we call equitable EV infrastructure, so that is making sure that our charging infrastructure as it gets deployed across the state is in lower income communities, not just in communities that already have zero emission vehicles. We are already seeing a shift in terms of who's buying those. If you add up the state and local incentives and now the federal EV tax credit, thank you President Biden, it's up to $27,000 that a low income Californian can get off of their ZEV. It's a lot of money. That said, we know we need to do more. We are 1.5 million electric vehicles. We have 30 million on the road. There's a long runway that we have to sprint down to make sure that as we get to 100% of sales being ZEV by 2035, we make sure that the Californians that need help getting into those cleaner vehicles are able to do so. I'll also say I'm incredibly excited about the cost parity projections. That is to say, hopefully in the next 2, 3, 5 years, it's actually cheaper to buy a zero-emission vehicle than a gas-powered gas guzzler. A big part of that, as Ellie knows, we're very focused, including through the governor's special session, which we just wrapped, making sure that Californians who aren't able to get into a ZEV yet are not being price gouged at the gas pumps as Californians were last fall when we paid up to $8 a gallon for gas, really making sure that the economic hardship of gas prices isn't disproportionately borne by low-income Californians across the state. I didn't even talk about building decarb. Okay, I'll briefly mention, so the federal tax credits on building decarb are just that, are tax credits, and we know that that's not enough to help Californians buy a heat pump or get energy retrofit upgrades that they need. And so last year, again, working with so many environmental justice groups across the state and the legislature, we dedicated $1 billion to an equitable building decarb program where we're doing specifically for low-income communities and multifamily homes, holistic energy upgrades, and again, making sure that those rebates are focused on the communities that need the help the most in order to be a part of the climate agenda and not be breathing in asthma and other indoor pollutants from gas infrastructure. So we're very proud of that program as well.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So another question. Carbon capture has not been shown to work, really, at most scales. Why is California investing so much money in this when there are so many other worthy projects?
So we're not investing money in it. I want to correct the data on this. The state is not funding carbon capture projects. The state does have an incentive program for carbon removal, which is very different. Last year, we worked with the legislature on SB 905, which did set out a broad regulatory framework on carbon capture. I know there's a lot of trepidation about the technology. However, I think a number of scientists around the world have said that it will be needed. We want to make sure that California is able to, as we've done with so many other technologies in the past, ensure that our use of it is safe and equitable, and make sure that we are guided by the latest science and data in terms of what is needed and how it will be deployed. So a lot more to come on that front through the public rulemaking process and the regulatory framework that our colleagues at the Air Board will be setting up this year.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. What about the grid?
That's a big stack, Ellie.
I know I still have 4 minutes left, so.
Okay, rapid fire.
We so appreciate your demonstrating democratic values by staying here with us. So electrification is needed, but power outages from storms and heat and aging infrastructure are too common. They impact rural communities especially. What plans are in place to ensure reliable electricity delivery?
Yay. So our biggest power plant in California, does anyone know what it is? It's battery storage. If you add up all of the amount of battery storage that we have supporting the grid right now, it outweighs any other power plant, I'll call it. That is something we are incredibly proud of. In the last few years, the amount of storage that we have been able to add. I'm so excited about the amount of storage we've dedicated investments to going forward. We know that that backup power is needed. We also dedicated investments into making sure that vehicle to grid happens and is a reality in California. We have 1.5 million vehicles, zero emission powered on the road. What if those all doubled as batteries? There's an incredibly exciting future in the electric school buses that we are deploying weekly across the state. I love the electric school buses. Those could power our schools. They're already doing it down in San Diego last year. And so more storage, more clean investment. You'll see additional details on the clean energy plan through May Revise, and then making sure vehicle to grid is a reality. And I'll just broadly saying, one of the, I am a mitigation fanatic, but I have had so much fun learning more about resilience and adaptation in the state. And if you haven't had a chance to go look at California's adaptation strategy, it's an incredibly holistic approach to how we are protecting Californians from power outages, from wildfires, from extreme heat, from the flooding that we know is going to hit the state, continue to hit the state for the next few months. Just as we have the scoping plan on the mitigation side, we now have a comprehensive adaptation strategy with 150 clear metrics and goals. Please hold us accountable, protecting Californians from the imminent threats and our most vulnerable Californians from the imminent threats needs to continue to be, it will continue to be a priority across this administration. There are a lot of investments, and I see Commissioner Gunda in the back, who will do a lot more talking about what we're actually doing during PSPS. That's his job. I mostly just call him. But making sure that all of our investments in resilience up front are protecting Californians and getting us off the fossil fuels that we know are creating the problem.
2 more questions for you.
I think Siva might be available for a few questions.
Siva will be up soon, and we look forward to that. So why is CalGEM still issuing permits, and can the governor tell them to deny them?
I already answered this question, Ellie.
Do you want to say it again?
CalGEM is following the law. We passed with the legislature a very protective health and safety law that would have prevented those permits from going out. It has been stayed, so CalGEM has to implement it. We continue to work with partners across the state in assessing options to make sure we are protecting their health. But at the end of the day, fighting the referendum, making sure that we are able to actually implement that law is what what all communities need long term.
Last question for you, Lauren. What gives you hope in the face of all that you know? You're in the thick of all of this, as many people here in the room are. And what does give you hope, and what's your message of inspiration to everybody here?
What gives me hope? I have to say, being here this morning with all of you gives me hope, looking out at all of your faces, thinking about the amount of partnership that has gotten us and the state of California to today, and how much more we can do together, how much more we need to do together. Having willing partners at the table with us is ultimately how we're going to tackle this crisis on the time scale that we know we need to, which is a 6-year window, which is narrowing every time I read an IPCC report. Last year, I think we proved to the state and the world how strong the coalition of climate action advocates, legislators, labor partners, government employees can be when we come together and are all focused on tackling the issue together. And what makes me hopeful is that coalition continuing to tackle this crisis.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Let's give Lauren a hand, really.
Thanks,
Thank you so much. Climate champion, Lauren Sanchez. Let's give her a standing ovation. Come on, thank her. She does work on our behalf every single day. Thank you, Lauren. Woo! Great. So now it is my pleasure to bring up Duran Amiran from our staff at the Climate Center, who will be emceeing the next portion of this program. Thank you so much, everyone. Welcome, Duran.
Thank you, Ellie. All right, and thank you, everybody. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Lauren, and thank you so much, Lauren, Senator Becker, and Ellie Cohen. What a great way to start the day. Thank you so much. I also want to take a moment before I introduce our next panel. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here, and to thank all of our sponsors who helped make this possible. It was a number of organizations and businesses that are involved in this fight with us, and without their support, we would not all be able to be here today. So you're seeing their logos on the screen, but I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Citizens Climate Lobby, Clean Power Alliance, Electric Power, MCE, the Microgrid Resources Coalition, Nuvei. Some of these folks have tables out there. Please, during the breaks, go visit them, check them out, grab the free pens. This is all wonderful stuff. Peninsula Clean Energy, Quit Carbon, Reimagine Power, the Sierra Club. Thank you. There they are. Woo! Sierra Club. Renewable America, RNA. Where's Hoosh and Artie? They're here too. San Jose Clean Energy, Sunnova, SunPower, Sunrun. I know Walker's here. Walker Sunrun, thank you so much for your support. And SMUD, our local supporter here in Sacramento. So let's hear a round of applause for all of our sponsors. They're putting their money where their mouth is. Some of them have freebies and swag. We encourage you all to take advantage of those opportunities, and most importantly, find out all the good work they do and how they can help us all achieve a clean energy future. So I want to thank all of them. And now, ready to move to our legislative leaders panel. I'm only going to introduce the moderator, and then the moderator can introduce the rest. She'll handle the Q&A and all the rest. So if you have questions, use those 3x5 cards. There will be another Q&A period after this. Nadia Lopez is a true Californian, right? Nadia is a native of Chula Vista, right? You went to San Francisco State, so you got the Northern California, Southern California thing dialed in. And she's a reporter covering environmental policy issues for Calmatters. Before that, she worked for the San Joaquin Valley for the Fresno Bee and reported from City Hall for the San Jose Spotlight. So please give a warm welcome to a great writer and a great reporter, Nadia Lopez. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. So great. Today we're going to be talking about climate policy and equitable solutions in ensuring the clean energy transition. So today I'm joined by Assemblymember and Majority Leader Eloise Gomez Reyes. Assemblymember Rick Chavez Zbur. And California Sierra Club Director, Brandon Dawson. So we'll be discussing this year's legislative climate priorities and specifically policies that will help us accelerate our climate and emissions reduction goals in an equitable way. So we know we need to move fast to meet state mandates to cut emissions by 48% below 1990 levels by 2030. But we also know that passing the best policies to ensure equity will come with challenges. So I'd like to give each of you a couple minutes to introduce yourselves and discuss what we could be seeing during this legislative session when it comes to our climate priorities. So Assemblymember Reyes, would you like to begin?
Thank you so much. Ellie, you've got quite a group here. My goodness. And the sponsors you have, I mean, everything we want to know and everybody we need to know, they're all here. So thank you all for being here. It's such an important topic, and there's so much to learn. For myself, I learned so much from my colleagues, but so much from my staff also. I surround myself with smart people that know a whole lot more than I do, so that when we are arguing on these bills that I just know who's in my ear. So I want to tell you about two bills, one near and dear to my heart, and that's AB 1000. AB 1000, this is the third time I'm trying this bill. Warehouses in the Inland Empire especially, it's throughout Central California. It's in the areas where we have blacks, Latinos, the immigrants, the poor. This is where you're going to find most of the warehouses. They've already been dumped on, so they say, why not dump some more? Let's put some more warehouses, and let's put them close to the homes. Let's put them close to the schools. Oh, the school has to sell because they can't keep sending the kids there. It doesn't matter. AB 1000 now says that there has to be a buffer zone between a new warehouse that is 100,000 square feet or more and sensitive receptors, like homes, like schools, like daycare centers, hospitals, where people are trying to live, where people are trying to have fun. It also allows for 750 feet if you've already electrified and there's not going to be any idling. It's really important to get this passed sooner rather than later, and to make sure that it is powered by the people, not powered by industry, who will try to do a 100-foot buffer zone for 400,000 square foot warehouse. It's a question of public health, and it's a question of quality of life. The other is my AB 241, the Clean Transportation Modernization. We already talked about AB 8 fees. Those are going to run out at the end of this year. We need to reauthorize so that as we get the money for infrastructure and for rebates, we've got to make sure that the money is there, but we also want to make sure that we modernize it. Approximately $173 million goes out in these funds. We want to make sure that, again, that we modernize it and that we reauthorize it. It's for the Clean Transportation Program at the Energy Commission and the Air Quality Improvement Program at CARB and the Enhancement Fleet modernization program at the Bureau of Automotive Repair. We got to take care of this, and this is the year to do it. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make sure both of those get passed. So thank you.
Yeah, proceed.
So I'm Rick Chavez Zbur. I'm the new Assembly member for representing the 51st District, which is, starts in Los Feliz and runs west all the way out to Santa Monica. And one of, just by way of background, I was an environmental lawyer at a large firm for 30 years. And also was president of California League of Conservation Voters, now California Environmental Voters, for about 8 years. As well, and that is when I became very interested in climate, and one of my key issues that I ran on in the campaign was really addressing the urgency of climate change, because we need to do it. We need to do it to protect our kids, for our planet, and really trying to bring, I think, some of the expertise that I brought to bear as basically an environmental lawyer that focused on renewable energy infrastructure projects, and bringing that here into the Assembly. I've got 4 bills this year. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. My main focus, and I think it's taking up over half of my office's time, is AB 3, which is the California Offshore Wind and Jobs Advancement Act. It's a bill that is really focused on the fact that we actually need offshore wind, not only the 4.5 gigawatts in the leases that have already been extended, but the other 25 gigawatts that's going to come after that. If we are going to get off of dirty fossil fuels, the strategy that we need is one in which we electrify, and that means, 125 or so more gigawatts of electricity that we need to bring online. This isn't even a part of the scoping plan. The scoping plan is assuming that we're going to actually have this electric power in place, and offshore wind is a key component. So my bill is actually recognizing the fact that we actually have a lot of challenges ahead of us. When I practiced law, I used to tell my clients, I know you want it perfect, you want it cheap, and you want it fast. You could only get 2 out of the 3 of those. In this case, we owe it to the public to give the public all of these things. We need to focus on the cost of the ratepayers. We need to do it fast because the lives of our kids and our planet depend on it. And we need to make it perfect in the sense that we need to make sure that these significant projects protect our really sensitive marine resources and cultural resources and our beautiful coastal areas. And we need to really build some really massive, unfortunately, ports. And we need to figure out how we're going to do that and actually be true to the environmental standards that we really pride ourselves on here in California. And at the same time, I think, achieve environmental justice and address, I think, some of the friction that has arisen between our friends in labor and our friends in the environmental community over issues of jobs. And I think offshore wind is the largest potential jobs program that the state will have had the benefit of since World War II. And we have the ability, I think, to bring hundreds of thousands of jobs into the state of California by focusing on how we keep the fabrication of these very large wind turbines here in the state of California. So the bill is focusing on, one, taking the next step on where are these ports going to be located? How do we preserve the values that we need? How do we make sure that that we preserve the jobs here, that we can assemble these massive things? I mean, one of these turbines won't fit into Dodger or Giant Stadium. I mean, that's how big these things are. So we need new ports with depths that are really significant, and where we locate these really has a lot to do with sort of whether we're preserving our marine environment and our coastal resources. Second bill I'll just touch on, and then I'll stop so that we can ask questions, is AB 1176, which requires local climate action and electrification plans for all of our cities and towns. And essentially, we've got a lot of goals that we've set. We need to meet the electric car mandate by 2035. We've set electrification goals by 2045, an interim date. And one of the things we really haven't done, we have a lot of local jurisdictions that have voluntarily been making good progress. Santa Monica, which is in my district, has actually done a lot of work, and there are some others. But we haven't really harnessed the power and the ingenuity and the knowledge of local communities to become partners in our climate solutions. If you sort of think about it, we've heard stories in San Francisco where PG&E hasn't been able to serve affordable housing units because there was not enough planning, and they actually need to get authority from the PUC for the interconnects, for the transmission for the interconnects. We're not doing the planning that we need in our local jurisdictions. So AB 1176 would require every local jurisdiction in the state of California, as part of their general plan update, to include a climate action electrification plan. There are elements of things that they need to consider, like how do we make sure that everyone in every community has access to electric chargers they need? Do we need electric charging corridors where we actually have level 1, level 2, or level 3, or even just slow chargers that you can plug into a parking meter? What are the strategies that we have for having chargers in retail, residential, and commercial parking spaces so that people park in apartments can actually have access to the chargers they need? How do we think about building decarbonization? We have all of these incentives that are out there, but really the reality is when you talk to the person who lives in Santa Monica or in Hollywood or in El Sereno or in Hawthorne, they don't know how to access this stuff, and some of this will be done through the electric utilities, but some of it can be facilitated by actually having local jurisdictions putting in place, seeking the funding, and putting it together so that people can access these things. And I know I can electrify my house. I've got the ability to sort of replace my stove and my electric appliances, and to pay for the cost of bringing an electrician in and a plumber in to do that. But most Californians can't. They really can't. I mean, you talk about the fact that it's, $700 or $800 or $1,000 to convert in addition to the cost of the new electric. We need funding to subsidize that, and we need to sort of do that for low-income Californians, or they're not going to be able to be part of the plan. So this is actually intended to sort of bring local jurisdictions in as part of that planning solution on both electrification as well as building decarbonization, and put together plans and strategies. So those are the two bills that I'm working on. I've got a couple others that talk about bringing battery technology and rooftop solar to multifamily houses, which you can take a look at in my bill package. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for the invitation today. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Great. So I definitely want to, dive a little bit deeper in these electrification efforts, especially around transportation, which we all know accounts for a significant portion of our greenhouse gas emissions. But now I also want to introduce Brandon. I know Brandon has been a fierce advocate of certain policies, and why don't you discuss that a little bit and introduce yourself in a couple of minutes.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, Brandon Dawson, I'm the director of Sierra Club California. For those of you who don't know, Sierra Club California is a statewide chapter for Sierra Club in California. We're a team of scientists, lawyers, organizers who are fighting for the voice of the environment and for the communities that depend on the environment, which is everyone. So I'm not a legislator, so I don't have particular bills to talk about, and Ellie covered really eloquently a lot of the bills that I would have talked about, but there is one bill that I would name, which is AB 1167, which is a Wendy Carrillo bill related to bond reform for oil and gas wells. Right now, Californians are paying for cleaning up abandoned wells in communities. Last year alone, CalGym spent over $34 million to plug 171 wells in Cat Canyon alone, and that's unacceptable in our view. The industry should be paying to clean up what they're doing to the planet. And so this bill, would require that the bond be upfront in the full amount before they can actually go ahead and start drilling. And even though we don't want them to start drilling, we do want them to be liable for what they're causing. And so that's a really big priority for Sierra Club California, and it's sponsored by a number of organizations, Azul, NRDC, and some other environmental justice groups that I want to uplift. But one thing that I did want to talk about today is we talk a lot about characteristics of a climate champion or what is a climate champion. And while I have two next to me, I do want to talk about some characteristics that we see across the board within the California legislature, or what we would like to see. One of those is obviously a passion and commitment for the environment, and that's a willingness to take bold action, but also a willingness to do more than just put it on your website or your campaign page about how much you care about the environment or how much you care about John Muir Park somewhere, right? It's really about actually going out and running the hard bills that industry is going to take on and building that coalition that is going to be necessary to pass that bill in partnership with a lot of communities. And that leads to the second characteristic, which is the prioritization of equity and justice in all of the work that you're doing. Listening to environmental justice groups and the experience that they have and that they're experiencing on the ground is very important, and it's so easy to discount what they're saying when you have billions of dollars coming at you from the other way, but that's not what a climate champion should do. They should really go into those communities, listen on what's happening, and make sure that the policies that they're crafting are actually policies that are helpful for those that they're talking to. And that leads to the third point, which is the ability to collaborate and build coalitions, doing that often and being very transparent about what the conversations are that you're having. And that's not always possible because of different spaces in which you're operating, but it is important to, especially if you're legislating on an issue that disproportionately affects Black and brown communities, to go into Black and brown communities and talk to them about what you're legislating, right? Especially if you're from a affluent or a largely white district or something like that. And so that's something that Sierra Club California always tries to make sure that our climate champions are aware of. And then lastly is understanding the science behind climate policies. Knowing when industry is just being industry and pulling the wool over your eyes. The hydrogen lobby is doing that very well nowadays, and fortunately, a lot of environmental justice groups and environmental groups pushed back on that in a way that was really significant this past year through our arches advocacy, but also through just general principles document that Ellie and the Climate Center helped craft, relating to what clean hydrogen is, how to actually use, what entities should be used for, and things like that. And so having the ability to know when the industry is trying to just sustain business as usual is very important for climate champions, and that's something that we always want to make sure is very uplifted in that work. And so really appreciate you taking the time to hear me rant, and yeah.
Great. Well, so Assemblymember Zbur, you did a great job of explaining how your bill, AB 1176, would help, with that transition and decarbonization of buildings and transportation at the local level. But I also want to dig a little deeper into Assemblymember Reyes' bill, AB 1000, setting these restrictions between new warehouse construction and residential communities. This reminds me also of SB 1137, another setbacks bill. But first, let's talk about this. You said this is the third time that you've introduced this. What is this opposition? What is the challenge with, passing this kind of legislation?
Industry. I mean, the people that are building the warehouses want to continue to build the warehouses. They bought the cheap land in San Bernardino. They've talked to the County Board of Supervisors, and they've spent the time there rather than spending the time, as Brandon talked about, with the community. Find out what the community wants, what the community needs, and invest in the community. So it is industry also, unfortunately, this is the hardest part for me, is that since coming here and in my prior life as an attorney, I've represented injured workers as a workers' comp attorney. And since being here, I've always been 100% with labor. But the very people who are building the warehouse also, the laborers have opposed the bill because it is jobs. And finding the balance between jobs and what we're fighting for here, we have to be able to find that. There has to be a balance between good paying jobs and good air. People have to be able to have both. And it's a false choice to be able to say, well, what do you want? Do you want the good jobs or do you want clean air? And I want them both. And the community, especially our communities that have been dumped on for so long, deserve to have both. And I truly believe that we can find it. So those are, of course, Cal Chamber calls it a job killer, but that one I can deal with, an industry I can deal with, but I do want to protect those good paying jobs, and that's who I want to work most with, and that is with labor, to be able to protect their jobs that are close by, but just saying, it's a public health issue. We're going to pay now or we're going to pay later, and we've got to be able to find that distance. CARB is the one that came up with 1,000 feet. They did the studies that show that at 1,000 feet, you are protecting the health of the people. Because you have the diesel particulate matter from all those diesel trucks. It isn't just the warehouse. It's the trucks coming in and out and ruining our streets. Can I also say, one of the things that my colleague was talking about was planning. if we planned our communities in such a way that we knew we weren't going to have these warehouses next to the homes and the schools, then we'd be okay. But it's hodgepodge. It's okay, we'll plan for the very nice affluent areas, but for those others, for those ranchers, for those people that don't even have sidewalks, we don't have to worry about it. We do have to worry about it, because those are our brothers, our sisters, and those are the kids that are going to be tomorrow's leaders. We want to make sure that they have good health, because they deserve to be walking to their school and know that they're not going to be going through these potholes themselves and walking in mud. And they also need to know that the air that they are breathing is going to be taken care of, because we as adults are going to do something about it.
I want to take a brief moment to remind the audience to write their questions on 3x5 so we can ask the panelists during the last few minutes of our time here. So, I want to give also Brandon the opportunity to talk about the setbacks bill. It's something that environmental justice advocates have been championing for a long time, but obviously, that's come with challenges because there's been pushback from the fossil fuel industry, and now it's facing referendum for the 2024 ballot. So, what are the concerns advocates have with, weaning ourselves off fossil fuels? How do we, ensure that this transition away from oil and gas is equitable, but also ensures that we can have, strong, good-paying jobs in the new clean energy sector? And then I want to give Assemblymember Zbur the opportunity to discuss that as well, especially when it comes to offshore wind development. So, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that question. And I appreciate everyone who wrote questions to Lauren earlier today about the rework permit drilling and things like that, because I just wrote an op-ed about it, and they were not happy. The setbacks bill was obviously a big success for the environmental justice community. They had been working for decades for that piece of legislation, and it failed in the last 4 years 3 times before that. And so having that win was something that was so consequential, but you have to balance that with the fact that currently, as Ellie has said multiple times, the agency is still permitting wells within the setback zone in light of the referendum that's happening. And so how you reconcile that is very hard for the environmental justice community, and it's something that we feel it needs to be called out too. Because if you're trying to champion this effort in this bill that you signed, then you should also use your power to talk to the agency that you have power over to figure this out. Like, it's not that hard of an idea, but I understand the political consequences at play, but I just don't agree with them. Either way, there are other actions that they could take in order to facilitate, not permitting further, and that also includes something that you mentioned, which is an agency-wide transition plan for equitably moving away from oil and gas drilling that brings to the table environmental justice community, brings to the table labor, brings to the table all the regulators, and actually puts something forward that we can look to in the next 10, 20 years to get away from oil and gas drilling here in California, because it's so desperately needed, as we know from the IPCC report, but it also needs to be done in a way that doesn't leave communities behind and is extractive and capitalistic in what it's historically been. And then lastly, what they need to do, as I mentioned, is clean up the oil wells by making sure that the bonding requirements are sustainable, and also making sure that we're holding polluters liable for what they're causing. And so there's a 3-step plan that I laid out in that op-ed, specifically talking about what you need to do. And I'm happy to talk to the administration about how they would do that in a way that's legally. I was also a lawyer before. Now I'm this now, I guess. But I'm happy to talk to them about it, and they have my number. But it's a matter of just having the political will to do so. And that a lot of the time, that political will comes from my 500,000 members and supporters, but also you, if you're not one of those, out there in the audience. Call your legislator, have them talk to them as well, please. It would be great. So, yeah, there's a lot that can be done, and we're looking forward to doing it.
Right, and I read that op-ed, and you interestingly cited the current sort of fight between the oil and gas industry and Newsom. Can you talk a little bit about what you mentioned regarding,
Yeah, are you price
Newsom?
gouging? Yeah.
Yeah,
So, the price gouging penalty bill that was just passed is well, it's not even price gouging penalty really, but it's more of a transparency effort from the administration that we supported. It essentially sets up a system in which the CEC and the Energy Commission will have more of a monitoring and watchdog mechanism over price gouging for gas prices here in California, and then also having a kind of table working group to talk about how to bring those down when they are gouging. And Newsom touted that as like a huge effort. He was taking on big oil, things like that. Yes and no, right? Like, it's true that he did do something that will move the needle with regard to regulating an industry that's been overheating the planet, that's been preying on the working class in California. But also, again, you need to do more than just talking about that so publicly. You need to actually go talk to your oil and gas supervisor about what he's doing to permit the wells that he still is permitting. And unfortunately, there's no oil and gas supervisor right now that is in place a long time, but that conversation still needs to be had, and we're waiting for that conversation to be had. I opened up that op-ed by saying California politicians often say they'll protect the environment more than they do, and this is just another case of that in our opinion.
So, Assemblymember Zbur, we know that, part of the challenge with the switch to clean energy is addressing the impacts that it will have on the economy and transitioning workers out of the fossil fuel industry. These are good paying jobs, and a lot of people are worried, in the clean tech sector and the clean and blue energy sectors, will there be the support, the education, the training necessary to ensure that these workers will still have good paying jobs? So where do we begin with that? Where do we begin with discussing how we can incorporate equity throughout this development? And specifically offshore wind. You mentioned the state's goals. You mentioned that we need to update the port infrastructure. I mean, these are massive turbines, right? So as we're trying to rapidly electrify the power grid and replace oil and gas with renewables, what steps does the state need to take to make this, a equitable transition and development that the rest of the nation and the world can look towards?
I think one of the real opportunities for offshore wind is the fact that it has the potential of really, I think, bringing the environmental and the climate movement and the labor community back together, because their interests, if we do this the right way, are so aligned and can be so aligned. The number of jobs that we're talking about, if we actually bring the manufacturing back to California, if we, the current assumption had been that all the components are going to be manufactured someplace else. I think when I started getting involved in talking about this, and I talked to some of the offshore wind developers, not all of them, but a couple of them, they said, of course, these things are going to be manufactured in Portugal. And I'm like, well, why would they be manufactured in Portugal? I mean, you're talking about the amount of how long the tow is from the ports out to the offshore wind platforms. I mean, how are you going to bring all this stuff from Europe? I mean, if we're going to actually ask our ratepayers to pay some rate because we're going to be moving to a clean energy economy, we should have the jobs here in California. So one of the things that this bill, the other thing that I'm very cognizant of is that we can do this in a way that really inhibits offshore wind as well. I mean, we have to make sure that we site these in the right places, that we're protective of our fisheries, of our marine environments, of our sensitive coastal habitats. The State Lands Commission and the Energy Commission out of AB 525 has just done one study. Another one is coming out. They looked at all the potential ports across the state. There's almost too much information almost to digest because it was so broad scale. But they basically didn't have a lot of standards that they were using to select these ports. So what this bill will do is it basically says, take the next phase of looking at where these ports should be, prioritizing these things. One, protecting our sensitive marine resources and our sensitive habitats and our sensitive cultural resources. Two, making sure that the port locations have enough space so that we can assemble these things here. And three, making sure that the ports are such that we can actually accommodates fabrication, the manufacturing of these things in the state of California. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is recognizing that if we do this the wrong way and we just basically put on an in-state mandate, that we could actually really inhibit what happens with these things, and we need these from a climate perspective. So a part of the bill is really studying what are the economic benefits and the economic costs of actually imposing a 70% and an 85% in-state manufacturing content requirement. And the idea is there to understand sort of what, how much does this bring back to the tax base? What are the job benefits? Really making this real, understanding what that is, understanding what the workforce development challenges we have, basically putting some of these ports in some locations, we don't have the workforce for them. We also have to be cognizant of environmental justice principles, right? And that goes in two directions. One, making the jobs available for vulnerable communities, but also making sure that the impacts of this are not impacting vulnerable communities. So we have to look at both of those things. And so this bill really does that kind of studying of that, and will actually require that the CEC make a number of recommendations to the governor and the legislature to take the next steps. The last thing I'll say, I'll let you answer another question, is we don't have a lot of time to do this. I know I met one of the first groups I met with on this offshore wind bill was Sierra Club and CEHA and California Environmental Voters and NRDC. Yeah, I think it was on my first week in office. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't appreciate, and I think the State Lands Commission study said this, is that if we don't have a standard, if we don't actually move forward with forcing decisions on the ports, and I'm not someone who thinks we should be permit streamlining and not having robust public processes and studying that. But I think we need to make sure that we understand what the process is going to be so that it can happen and force our agencies to do it. If we don't, the State Lands Commission estimated that we wouldn't have the ports entitled to even the starting of the building until for 15 years. Our climate goals assume that we're going to have 5 gigawatts I think in 8 years and another 25 gigawatts beyond that. And I think unless we do something with the ports, we're not even going to have the ports built in that time period. So we really have to focus on this, and that's what this bill does. I think that, when I think about this bill, it is a bill about protecting our sensitive habitat, and it's about environmental justice, making sure that we're bringing the jobs back to the state of California and citing this in a way so that environmental justice communities have the benefit of this, and that is the reason why I'm spending so much time on this bill.
Thank you for elaborating, and that actually answered one of the audience questions we had about the challenges for scaling up offshore wind. So we have a little bit of time for some more questions here. First, a lot of questions actually related to AB 1176. So yeah, one of them is, how do you plan to bridge the gap between the legislation that is passed and implementation at the local level? Educating the local agencies and government about the climate action plan for electrification.
So, I think one of the issues with 1176 is you're going to have local governments, I think, worried about the cost that's going to be imposed on them in order to engage in this planning process. But I mean, the reality is we know that if we don't plan, the things we need to do to protect our environment and advance climate are just not going to happen. And so we need local jurisdictions. There's a number of them that are sort of doing this on their own without the mandates, but it's only a handful. Santa Monica, which is in my district, has actually already done this sort of in part. But I think some of this is they need some funding in that. I'm actually working with the budget committee now to see whether some of the funding that was in the climate package last year is available for to support some of the planning that needs to happen. This shouldn't be that much cost though, because all jurisdictions do general plan updates. This doesn't require a general plan update to be done tomorrow. It basically says general plan updates that are in process now up through 2025. You can just start, but those that are adopted after 2025, you have to have this climate change element as part of it. So it's part of their normal planning process and what they should be doing to think about how we have government policy at the local level that is actually makes our local governments partners in climate action. And so that's something that I think they should be doing anyway, but it gives them a mandate in the sense that they've got to do the planning, but it also actually gives a big nod to local decision-making and local control and allowing them to come up with the strategies that fit their communities. They understand where people in their communities are going to need chargers. They're going to have a standard to say, look, at key thing you need to do is make sure that low-income communities have access to these things. Where in your plan are you going to do it? And these things obviously are subject to CEQA. So there are some real standards in the bill that I think are going to really push this ahead. Some jurisdictions will do it better than others, those that are invested in it, some will, but I think it will result in significant progress.
Great. So we have time briefly for 2 more questions, one for you, Assemblymember Reyes, and then one for you, Brendan. The first being about your bill, AB 1000. Thank you for AB 1000. I live where a 500 square foot warehouse is being proposed. The developer is from out of town and appears to be open to other locations if city government and other factors can support it. Is there anything that can be done to incentivize municipalities to find and support alternate locations for warehouses? Thank you. A couple minutes, please.
It would be wonderful if they would find an incentive. The truth is that once they've purchased a piece of property, those who own that property and want to build a warehouse, their only incentive is to make friends with whoever's going to be making the decision. That's it. That's what happens. That's the reality. So unless we put the guardrails and we say, doesn't matter how many friends you have there, you cannot build it next to people. You cannot build it next to homes. You can't build it next to the schools. I will tell you that in San Bernardino, when I look at the numbers, we have 1 billion square feet of warehouse already built. We have another 300 million already planned. We can't support this. We cannot support this. In Bloomington alone, it's an unincorporated area that we have 8 schools. 6 of the 8 schools had or were going to have a warehouse built within a very short distance. They just approved this new project in Bloomington, and it will now surround an elementary school, Zimmerman Elementary School. The school district is selling that particular school because now that the county has approved the rest of the building of the warehouses, the school district cannot afford, for the health of the children, to allow that school to remain. So they have now sold the school to the developer. They're going to start busing the children to another school. This is the reality. So as long as there are no rules that say you cannot approve it, they will find a way to get it approved, and they will be built right next to schools, right next to homes. There's another family who had purchased a piece of property. The land behind them was zoned residential, so they anticipated lots of homes being built there. The county rezoned it to industrial, put up a 100-foot wall. That's their backyard. They had a 6-foot wall. They could see the mountains before. They now have a 100-foot wall, and behind that are the warehouses. Amazon came in. Amazon has now closed it down. That wall remains. So unless we set the guardrails and say, you cannot do it, they will find a way to have them built. We have to have the guardrails. We have to have a buffer zone. We did it for the oil wells. We should be able to do it for the warehouses. The people deserve it.
That wasn't the question, really, but oh my goodness. Thank you. And just briefly, a couple, moments. How can the climate movement in California be most helpful for climate policy? If you want to give a couple sentences to wrap up our panel.
Accountability, hold your legislators accountable for their votes, and Sierra Club California does a really good job at tracking those votes, as do a lot of other organizations, so accountability is key. And then also staying on top of the legislation that does pass that will affect your community as well. As Assemblymember Zbur mentioned, this bill 1176 will have a lot of implementation at the local level, and so how they implement that and how that implementation is developed will need to be go before like a public council and things like that. So attend your public council meetings, attend your county board of supervisor meetings, have the conversations with them about what you want to see that implementation looks like, because that's the best way, in my opinion, for a lot of local communities to have input on climate action.
Thank you so much. Thank you, really appreciate your time, and that wraps up our panel discussion.
All right, well, we're just about ready for our first break. I just have a couple of important things I want to share with you before we do that. First of all, regarding parking. This is very important, not nearly as important as what these people were saying, but it is still important. If you parked in the garage, that's the building, it's $4 an hour or $28 a day. But if you parked in the garage, you can go to the front desk and they will give you a validation that will save you $8. So if that's one option. If you parked here in the Holiday Inn lot, it's $30 and you pay at the front desk. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had that information. If you have any questions, just look for one of the Climate Center staff and we'll help clarify for you. I wanted to take another moment also to thank all of our partners, our promotional partners who helped make this event possible. And remind us, really, we're hearing a lot about the Climate Center, we're hearing a lot about individual bills and legislators and the like, but remember, this is a team sport, right? We're all in this together. This is something that is going to take many hands, both private and public and nonprofit, and we're all going to be working together with labor and with all the different organizations that are represented here in the room, which gives me a great opportunity to say we have a 20-minute break now. Take that time to go meet some of our sponsors, to meet each other. Make sure you meet at least one person you never met before, because that's how we're going to build this movement together to fight the climate fight and win. So I'm going to give you all about 20 minutes. We'll get back here at about 10:50. Up until then, there's some refreshments for you outside. Mix and mingle, talk to people you don't know, have a good time, and let's do this. All right, thank you. We'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. Please. Come on in, y'all. There we go. Fresh glasses. Senator Skinner. How are you? I'm good. That was a while ago. Good to see you again. I work with the Climate Center. I do. Still have a job. That's right. Where would we be without Senator Skinner? All right, welcome everybody. If I could invite you all to sit down, I just want to mention a couple of things before I introduce our next panel. First of all, once again, reminder to everybody, this is a team sport, so make sure you, like I said, make sure you're meeting new people while you're here. I often tell young people who ask me about college, like, what's the most important thing that happened to you in college? Which class? Which professor? I'm like, I can remember a few professors, but it was the people that I met that made all the difference, including Senator Nancy Skinner, who I met when I was in graduate school 30 plus years ago. So that's it's a small world. We're back together on a stage. I do want to mention to everybody a new feature on the Climate Center's website. We now have a bill tracker. You've been hearing about some of these important bills, SB 233 that we're going to be talking about here in just a moment. You can follow all of those on our website. If you go to Climate Center Our Work /bill tracker, it'll enable you to see what's going on and have your voice heard. So once again, thanks everybody. I see we're all gathered together. Our next panel is Batteries on Wheels, how electric vehicles can help California keep the lights on. Of course, you heard from Lauren Sanchez earlier the incredible potential that batteries have for helping us keep the lights on without needing to run extension cords from our electric vehicles into our refrigerators. So in order to introduce the whole panel, I'd like to introduce our moderator. He is Walker Wright. Walker is the VP of Public Policy for Sunrun. Sunrun is a generous sponsor of this event, so thank you, Sunrun. Sunrun is the leading distributed solar energy storage and energy services company in the U.S. Walker has held numerous leadership positions in the clean energy space. He's got degrees from Princeton and the London School of Economics, which is why he won't be surprised when I say that he resides in Oakland and enjoys the game of football, right? The one you play with your feet, I'm talking about. All right, so thank you very much, Walker. The floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I really view this panel as sort of connecting the dots on the California clean energy story. The two panelists that we have are going to really help us look at the agency level and also the legislative level. Going back, over the weekend, I was thinking about all the legislation that Senator Skinner has been a part of, going from energy efficiency to storage to solar. We're not going to mention that. Green hydrogen. The list is endless. So I think that there's probably no one in the building with more institutional memory and knowledge of the California clean energy story from a legislative perspective. So we're all honored here in this room right now. And when we talk about Commissioner Gunda, he's in the trenches right now on the massive implementation phase of what we're trying to do in California. I was just in Japan as part of a Japan clean energy delegation, and it was an honor to talk about the progress that we're making from the perspective of what is now, is it the number 3 or the number 4 economy in the world? Number 4. So, and what's amazing is that we're growing our economy with such clean energy leadership when there's so many naysayers out there. And the questions that I was getting in Japan over and over again were about, well, how did Sunrun go from an idea on a napkin at Stanford University in 2007 to a solar and now storage and energy services and EV partnership company, and that we're going to get into why Sunrun now defines itself that way instead of just a solar company. How did Sunrun happen? That would never happen in most of the world, where you have an idea on a napkin growing to a company that now has about 13,000 people working at it, operating in 23 states. We'll soon pass 1 million solar installations. Those solar installations are increasingly with batteries. And that story can really only happen in California, where you have the combination of innovation, investment at scale, and a policy environment willing to push the envelope and take risks. And so we're going to be able to connect those dots today and also talk about an innovative bill that I think will continue to get headlines. And one of the themes here, and Commissioner Gunda is going to get into it a little bit, is taking value from the distributed world of EVs that are out there. So trivia question, how many EVs are there on the roads in California today? 1.5 million. So how many rooftop solar systems? 1.6 million. Do you think there's a nexus between those two? Right, there's an absolute nexus. And so, from a Sunrun perspective, it's really no longer about installing solar, it's about financing solar, the battery. We have a partnership with the Ford Motor Company. What's the number 1 selling car in the US for the past 40 years? Ford F-150, that's right. And there is a massive wait list for people to get that car. And what we're going to talk about today is how can we leverage the value from all those EVs out there, all those batteries, right? So like when I fly over any city and I'm about to land, I look down and I see all these empty rooftops. And now it's like I'm looking down at all those cars and thinking, my God, imagine the value that those cars could provide to the grid when in the future we're going to be leveraging private investment. So it's a fantastic story as we talk about how expensive the clean energy transition is going to be. So my first question for Senator Skinner is, when you connect the dots between all of your energy efficiency work, all the renewable work, and you're now looking at this bill as you're coming towards the end of your amazing legislative career, what does AB 233 mean to you? SB 233, SB, excuse me.
Well, let me answer it with first, my mentor was Art Rosenfeld, who some of you hopefully are familiar with, pretty much the creator of California's entire energy efficiency story, whether appliance standards, buildings, you name it. And from Art, what I learned was you want to maximize the amount of the unit, every unit of energy used, you need to maximize its output. And so when I think about much of what I've done, I mean, clearly I'm trying to assist California transition off fossil fuels. But in doing so, you also want to maximize that output. And the thing about, well, so back in 2010, I think it was, might have been 2009, I can't remember. Anyway, when it was 2010, California was initiating its aggressive beginning of the aggressive renewable portfolio standard. So in other words, deciding that we're going to generate most of our electricity from non-fossil fuel sources. Now, we know that the non-fossil fuel sources are intermittent. They're not 24/7. And so a good friend of mine, Janice Lynn, approached me and said, you know, the game changer for our RPS standard is going to be energy storage. And at that point, it wasn't commercially available. There was not a lot of investment. There was no utility grade energy storage other than pumped hydro. But we decided to do a bill, and I did a bill, and it passed because most people just I didn't take me seriously, and I didn't get a lot of opposition, so thank goodness. Anyway, and now since then, I'm looking at EVs, and I'm thinking, these things are energy storage on wheels. I mean, when I was first presenting my energy storage bill, I would use my phone as my prop. I'd say, look, you're all carrying energy storage devices in your pocket. Well, we use these for all kinds of things, but we don't necessarily use them to power other devices. However, that EV has the ability to power other devices. Why would you waste that battery, given how short of a time most people, or how few miles most people use a vehicle in any given day? So that's what motivated my bill, which basically requires vehicles to have bidirectional charging capability by the model year. Let me look. I think it's 2027. Yeah. So that's its reason, and that's what was the motivation.
So, Commissioner Gunda, just looking at your academic career, then so much of the research you're doing at the CEC, and now from the perspective of a commissioner, you're sort of charged of connecting these dots, but also figuring out how we can do it in the most efficient manner. So when you look at all these batteries that are out there, and more that will be there on the roads, how can we leverage this investment to sort of get the CEC together from the perspective of putting together their master plan for what the grid should look like?
Yeah, thank you, Walker. So first of all, I just want to take a moment to thank the Climate Center for this opportunity to be here with who I would consider as one of my mentors, Nancy and Senator Skinner, and I had a chance to work at UC Davis together, and it was one of the best moments for me from a mentorship standpoint, so thank you, Senator Skinner. And I think Walker talked about the extraordinary amount of work she has been able to do at the legislature and be able to push some of the boldest, ambitious goals. So just want to thank you again for your incredible work, again, this legislative cycle too, including the special session.
Very glad you are where you are.
So, and I want to thank Kurt and Ellie. Thank you. It was amazing to travel with them in Egypt to COP27, and much of the discussion was centered around what we're talking today. So I kind of want to just take the step back to a high level. The California's climate policy, as most of us agree and generally see the same point, is predicated on two key elements, right? So we want to electrify the loads as much as we can, so reduce the emissions from the loads, and simultaneously clean our grid. And this is where I want to focus a little bit. So when we talk about cleaning our grid, we do have some ambitious goals, like SB 100, which is to have 100% clean energy by 2045. And along the way, we have 90% goal, 95% goal, and so on. So when we think about the clean, you cannot remove the clean from affordable, equitable, and reliable, right? So those are the four cornerstones of how we think about any energy resource, is how do we bring those four pieces together. And I'm in an interesting phase and an interesting spot of being able to work on SB 100, but also keep the lights on in California as we transition around the corner. So I'm going to take a moment to remind all of us about what happened on September 6th last year. So we got hit with an incredible heat wave last year. And as we were kind of navigating that heat wave in September, especially on September 6th, we were on par to get to 53,000 megawatts in CAISO, right? So we're talking about 7,000 megawatt deviation from what would be an average load in September for CAISO. So 7,000, for context, is 2 LADWPs on the top of CAISO, right? So that's what we were trying to tackle and then get through the day. And as you all know, the one of the pivotal moments of the journey and the reason why we kept the lights on was the text alert everybody in this room probably got. And we dropped 2,000 megawatts of load in approximately 20 minutes. And that helped us get through that evening crunch. So now when we talk about that, the sobering part of that story is, which is not every day talked about, is how many diesel backup generators were running in California during the time, right? So we were running full throttle diesel generators. We were running our thermal fleet. The entire 27,000 megawatts of thermal fleet was running fully, and we were like hoping that nothing kind of drops that day, right? So we were kind of getting through. And for context, most of those resources are in disadvantaged communities, and communities that have really, carried the brunt of, the climate and energy impacts in California. So then the question becomes, if we are all pretty clear on our North Star on where we are getting to this clean energy future that's for all Californians, and we recognize that today the clean energy is not for all Californians, and oftentimes it comes at very high cost to some communities, how do we get there? And I think if there is one part, and almost like a silver bullet, I mean, we have to do everything on the table, but one silver bullet is demand flexibility, right? It's this incredible opportunity to what Senator Skinner was saying. Here you're going to have 60,000 megawatts of EV storage on batteries by 2030. And if you can think about harnessing 10% of that, that's 6 gigs. Mm-hmm. And we can get through what we went through last year without turning on the backup generators. So to me, that is the value. And how do we then care about non-energy benefits? How do we talk about grid reliability, and how do we value that and ensure that the value proposition is created as we journey? So that's my, thank you.
Fantastic. I'm really happy that Senator Skinner mentioned Art Rosenfeld. I just want to put a plug in for the CEC. On their website, they talk about California's history in energy efficiency. Over the past 40 years, California residents have saved about $100 billion due to energy efficiency strategy, which is by far the leader in the country. And I think we're trying to take this similar theme and leverage these batteries going forward. Commissioner Gunda, your staff definitely emailed Sunrun during that week in September, asking for data on the amount of batteries that we were able to have those electrons exported into the grid during that time, playing our small part. And it allows us to imagine what the future could be, right? So just right now in California, about 10 to 20% of the solar systems going in have batteries. That's going to drastically increase shortly. And then the next question is, where are we going to go with EV partnerships, right? So you can imagine if September of last year takes place 5 or 10 years from now, what type of value we can create. And more importantly, from our perspective, it's going to be more non-ratepayer value. We need to take private capital, and this is something that Senator Skinner has talked about a lot, is taking private capital and creating value for everyone. So if you could just, Commissioner Gunda, do you guys model these things going forward in terms of what it could look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to take this opportunity to set the stage then on broad framework on how we can think about demand-side resources and particularly demand flexibility. So if we look at California's kind of electricity planning, most of you know, CPUC does the integrated resource planning, and this is an opportunity for us to think about how do we shape the conversation. And luckily, the SB 846, the bill last year, that both gave the conditions necessary to extend Diablo if necessary, but also gave other tasks to CEC required other tasks, which is, apart from keeping Senator Skinner completely apprised regularly, via text or report, the other elements is like just making sure there is alternatives to Diablo, and how does load flexibility form a part of the solution. So here's kind of how we are thinking about the load flexibility moving forward. For those of you who are in energy planning might track this very well, but I'll try to kind of bring it up to a policy level. There are broadly 3 buckets that we can think about in demand, right? So there is, how do we modify the demand through rates and automation? So if you're thinking about that's what we call demand modifier in our planning. So you're doing everything you can to signal the right rates. So CalFuse is something CPUC is working on. There are currently time of use rate tariffs and structures. So how do you make sure that the load in itself, to begin with, is a very good citizen of the grid? So that's called demand modifier, and then we do plan for that. And our opportunity here is, through the right signal, how do you expand the amount of demand modifier we have today? Right. The second bucket is the very first element of resource planning. How do we, once we understand the demand, how do we bring enough supply to meet that demand? And what amount of demand response can we bake into that? And the third element, which we are right now thinking through and planning, is how do you bring the rest of these resources, like EVs and such, not only to the demand modifier and the resource stack, but the third element, emergency services. And how do you stack the different value propositions so the OEMs can think about that, so the utilities can think about it, and third parties can think about baking that value as you make an EV purchase.
Fantastic, thank you. Senator Skinner, I'm also reminded that when you first ran some of your early energy storage legislation, truly no one understood what we were talking about.
Some of it.
And at this point, the reality is that when the grid goes down, homes are kept running by backup power, clean backup power, which is essential in this conversation considering the diesel generation purchases that we're seeing. And also right now, with bidirectional inverters, you can back up your home with that battery in your car. So there's a Nissan Leaf sitting out in front. Again, it's a reminder of what we can do with relatively simple legislation. And so, Senator Skinner, from your perspective, given the landscape that you have seen over the years, what is most challenging at this point in terms of finding value as part of this green energy transition?
So I'm going to answer this in a 2-part way. I want to, as much as we're talking today about, at least my build, bidirectional charging and utilizing the power of our batteries for more than just powering the vehicle, it's an important conversation, obviously, as we move. California by 2035 is not going to allow the sale of fossil fuel vehicles. The Biden administration has just announced proposed new rules. We'll see how ambitious they end up being in terms of their adoption, but still, they're really a welcome sign to help motivate more EVs. But as we move to full electrification, we still want to do it in a way that's the most efficient. It is not, using more electricity is not anything necessarily to celebrate. We want to use as little as possible for the purpose that we are accomplishing with that use of the electricity. So we still need to make efficiency high on our load order. And I feel like we have, in our quest to move to 100% renewable, that has been a little bit, it's not as shiny of an object. Efficiency is just not as shiny of an object. But I think it's so important because as much as we are moving in the directions that we're talking about, you still can buy the diesel generators. We still have peaker plants. You think about the amount of demand. The reason we have to use peaker plants is only for a certain number of hours. Now, unfortunately, that projection of the number of hours is going up because of high heat days, but it's still, and if we were more efficient, we might not have to rely on those. So we want to still absolutely prioritize efficiency. Now, another reason, Walker, as much as I think it's important that we have started to push batteries with solar, I also think, depending on your load, why buy another battery? Why go buy a battery pack for your house when your EV could do it? So there's embedded carbon in everything we produce. If we're about meeting a zero carbon future, we've got to think about there is embedded carbon in everything, in batteries, in EVs. So more is not better. Less is more.
Art Rosenfeld.
Yeah, Nissan has had bidirectional capacity from day one. All their EVs do. Tesla's now announced that they will have bidirectional capacity for all of their vehicles by, let's see, what year? 2025. Which I think Tesla was a little reluctant to make that announcement since they're the ones who have the battery packs. It's sort of competing, but hey, it's really good they're doing it. So that's what we want. We want the capability of every EV to be able, whether it's a fleet of EVs that can power a commercial building or your ability in your own home to turn to your EV at times when either rates are really high or when you can't turn something off but demand is too high and we need to control that demand. So those are some of the benefits of that bidirectional capability.
Thank you. Fantastic. And we're gonna shortly transition to some of these wonderful audience questions. And in the theme of connecting the dots, when we look at why people request batteries along with solar, if the audience were willing to guess why has there been a large increase in requests for batteries along with solar the last few years? Yeah, right. So in some zip codes where there's a lot of fire issues, PSPS, like probably 85% of the people calling up are asking for clean backup power. So that's the reality of where we are today. And the second reason why there's a push for batteries is for the aggregation of all those batteries, along with the batteries that are going to be in cars, where we'll get to be able to provide services to all ratepayers. So that's really sort of the customer perspective and also the industry perspective that needs to be there to continue to drive a clean energy economy and this value that's so necessary from the private sector. So this first question is one dear to my heart because it's asking about the consumer. So we go to all these conferences, we talk about energy, but we really have to look at it from the perspective of what consumers want, what they're asking for, and they're the ones that are making these decisions and in many ways driving it. So when we look at grid or EV to grid, VGI, how does this specifically benefit the individual consumer, especially lower income? So I'll go to Senator Skinner first and then Commissioner Gunda.
So clearly, there's the capacity to have V to G, have the EV battery power go into the grid, and I am more than open to that. But I think some of the real benefit of the bidirectional capability is to benefit the individual consumer in that you can time, if you have the EV, you could time the charging such so that you are charging it at the lowest electricity rate. And then when the rates are highest, you could utilize, independent of the need maybe for a demand reduction, just to benefit your own pocketbook, you could power your home or some number of the appliances in your home with the battery, so that you've then reduced that cost of drawing upon the electricity at its highest peak rates and charged your vehicle when it's the lowest. So those are some of the real benefits to the consumer, in addition to adding to that reliability of the grid of being able to rely on the EV at the point where we need to reduce demand.
Yeah, I think Senator Skinner really flagged two of the most important things, right? So in terms of affordability and health, and I think those are two extremely valuable things to talk about when we talk about flexibility. I want to just point a couple more things. A lot of our research suggests right now that customers, most probably low-income customers, will be on gas transition and at a later time, right? Like they will be on gas for the longest time. So it's extremely important to future-proof potential externalities of costs on them. So if we think about a much smaller consumer base with a large amount of gas distribution grid, and they have to bear the entire cost of that. So I think that's an important element that we should not forget is how do we ensure the electrification happens for everybody at the same time, and they have an opportunity to get into the value stream. And second, I think, just a global philosophical perspective that, Senator here mentioned, we are not talking necessarily about going from a highly industrialized past to a no industrialized future. We're still talking about going to an industrialized future, which probably could be pretty high, and the externalities of that could be really high. And it's important to figure out every way we can to minimize the impacts as we transition into the future.
Fantastic. And I wanted to provide some color commentary. We're all energy nerds in this room. I live in Oakland, and we have an EV, we have storage, we have solar. We're in that privileged place to do so. And we also have the ability to participate in different programs, providing value for that storage. We want to do so from our car as well. It's all really complicated, and the end consumer right now is struggling to understand what they can do. So I think that the theme of simplification is essential for us to move forward. And then I think it ties into the next question from the audience. I'm all for V2G, but also concerned about the cost of V2G ready EVs and homes. Many EVs, especially multifamily homes, may never use V2G capabilities. Can you speak to the cost of the Ford F-150 V2G package and ways to encourage V2G cost effectively? So I don't want, we should just talk about EVs in general, where they are in terms of the cost curve, and to encourage V2G cost effectively only in vehicles let me just get this right. To encourage V2G cost effectively and only in vehicles where it'll actually be used in. So I think that's a good question in terms of how do we know if the consumers are going to participate or not, or do they need to really be the pushers, or just knowing that their vehicles are going to participate via a certain program?
So, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think right now, most consumers wouldn't even know. Even if you had a Nissan Leaf and you're already bi-directional, wouldn't even know that you had this capacity and could utilize it. And it's not made simple. Interestingly enough, I think it was December, I read an article in the New York Times about just a resident in New Mexico who, faced with power outages, had an EV and went to a hardware store and got whatever the device was that he needed to basically utilize, and he had a bi-directional vehicle, but to utilize his vehicle to power his house. And he managed to do it. And he just did it, on his own. Now, whether that, the New York Times article didn't go into the detail of what exactly he purchased and whether that was available in our, could I do the same thing? Could you do the same thing? That's the thing that I think most consumers don't even know. So we need to make it as easy as possible. Right now, a lot of people don't have EVs. Independent of cost of EV, they don't have EV because either they don't have a garage or they don't have a place to charge it. So we already have limitations there, just in the infrastructure. So we need to do much more on that infrastructure front, as well as making it much easier for people.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add a couple things, and I think we all as state agencies have a lot of important work to do, and so I don't want to, necessarily assign roles and responsibilities to specific entities, but we as a state need to do this better, right? So there's a lot of tools that the legislature have been giving us. So I'm going to talk about some tools to create the value proposition and some opportunities. So the first on the tools, last year the legislature enacted almost $2 billion to the CEC to deploy to provide investments for reliability. So specifically in that is a huge opportunity to really pilot some of these projects and create test cases for that value proposition that we're talking about. Yeah. Second, I think, is the opportunity for training and education. As Walker kind of mentioned here, the kind of narrative around EVs is not necessarily all positive, right? Depending on who you talk to, which channels you watch, EVs are the problem for the grid, not the solution. And how do we create a way to like really educate people of the opportunity and not scare people off. So one of the things I really feel like I learned in this job over the last 2 years is if we want to do this, we need to come together, right? We need to figure out a way to work together and hear each other. So I want to talk about solving for simplicity, solving for value creation, solving for streamlining some of the permitting, distribution, upgrade delays that we're currently seeing, and misinformation together, right? So one of the easiest things to do is if we are talking afar from each other, there is a lot of opportunity to be scared of each other's values and each other's point of views. And we really scare people of the boldness and the vision we have. And if we could come closer, I think we have an opportunity to be inspired and quell some of these inaccuracies in how we educate. So, I think it's upon all of us to bring together a common message on how this could be a part of the future.
On the theme of education, I would be remiss to not mention, if next time you drive around and you drive by a school or a school district and you look at that school, recognize that that school is getting incredible savings from energy efficiency. Much of that is tied to legislation that Senator Skinner has worked on. But when we talk about education, all of us in this room, we weren't studying this stuff when we were in high school. Maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but I can say this, right now, 20% of California schools have rooftop solar. Most of them are investing heavily in energy efficiency. More of them are seeing batteries on site, and more of them are increasingly seeing
And we have a
yellow school buses.
electric school bus manufacturer in California.
And what I can say, more rewarding than anything is when you go to a school and you see the ribbon cutting ceremonies for these projects, it engages the kids in a way that's fantastic. And often tied to the legislation, as Senator Skinner knows, are STEM education packages. Yeah. So we are educating the next generation on these issues in a more sophisticated way than we even know. I mean, we're not home when our kids are going to school, but they're seeing this stuff, they're touching it in a real way, and that's tied to California leadership. Also, we're not getting everywhere we need to be. So the next question for Senator Skinner or Commissioner Gunda, whoever wants to take it first, is how can we work to create incentives for charging infrastructure in rural and low-income communities in the Central Valley where these communities need it most?
Work to create incentive.
I can jump in.
Go ahead.
So, okay, I'll jump in. So I think it's a good place to kind of say what a state agency does and what a right functioning of a state agency would be. So we are, and as a state agency, provide recommendations to the legislature on how we transition based on the public hearings we have, and then faithfully discharge the statutes we were given to do. And one of the things, both from the governor, the legislature, and the public, is equity, right? So, and then how do we ensure that we continuously invest in communities where the transition is going to be harder? So based on that, we have a few members here from the disadvantaged advisory committee that we have at CEC. It's called DACAG. A few members who serve on that are here. We lean on them to help us to figure out the best ways to put the money in the places that's most needed. So right now, I think what the state is doing is clearly sending a signal that a portion of the investments are going to be done in communities where we really need to put the most money. So I think we're doing that. The thing that we're not doing well is just because you put the money doesn't mean the impact is there. How do you ensure that the local impact is truly there is the second one, which we are working on. I have to say to Senator Skinner and her colleagues, they have been pushing us to do so. So I think we are on a path of that, but I think the long term is, I was so surprised with the $1 billion tag last year. We had $2 billion that was given to CEC, and I was like, oh my God, I've never seen a $2 billion figure before. I used to work at the university asking for $10,000 checks. So it was $2 billion was crazy, but $2 billion is very little for our transition. And how do we figure out more money? Thank you.
Excellent perspective there. We're being pulled off the stage. I feel like this conversation could go on for a long time. Really appreciate it, and just an honor to be up here with these two leaders. Thank you, guys. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Thanks, Walker. All right, and I think Walker is absolutely right. That conversation could have gone on for a long time. I know this is a subject many of us care about. I have to say that I did run a 1,000 watt inverter and an extension cord to my freezer during a public safety power shutoff a couple of years ago from my Nissan Leaf, and I was able to keep my meat frozen. So that's just maybe too much information, but I just wanted to share that with you. It is doable, but that's not the future we want. We want a seamless future where every charger does that automatically and you're not running extension cords through the back window. So thanks to those leaders for what they're doing. Yes, one more time, thank you for Senator Skinner and Commissioner Gunda and Walker and Sunrun and all of you. So we're going to move to a really important conversation. It's actually a part of the program I've been really excited about since I first heard about the next three speakers. We're going to be talking about justice. We're going to be talking about jobs. I'm going to introduce three speakers individually and separately, and after they're all done, I'm going to invite them back to the stage for a collaborative Q&A before we have our last quick speaker and then something you're all excited about, which is lunch. But before that, I'd like to introduce Nalleli Cobo. Nalleli Cobo is the winner of the prestigious Goldman Prize, which is like the Nobel Prize for environmental activists. Please welcome her up to the stage. Come on up, Nalleli. Nalleli grew up in South LA. She launched her activism at a very young age, even younger than you are now, as a result of foul smells emanating from an oil well across the street from her home. Over the years, you've endured health challenges, but you began attending meetings with your mother, who is also with us. There she is. I'd like to recognize Mrs. Nalleli's mom, without whom none of this would be possible, so thank you for being here. Nalleli, you gave your first public speech on this issue, I believe, at the age of 9. So that's very impressive. You've done a lot. You founded People Not Pozos, the South Central Youth Leadership Council. I won't take up too much more time, but I just want to say Nalleli's organizing in LA City and County has really resulted in positive impacts. Both of those jurisdictions have now voted to end new oil exploration and phase out existing wells. So that's a win. And so please continue to welcome Nalleli Cobo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hello, hello, everyone. Really? Come on, guys. That was a little sad, but I'm gonna let it slide. Thank you so much to words. Very bad timing to not be able to speak. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. I'm very excited to share my story with you all. I want to start off with something a little interactive. So I'm going to ask you guys what you think belongs in a community and just shout them out. Schools, parks, trees, clean air. Keep them coming. Sidewalks, bike paths, trees. Notice how nobody said an oil well. What do you think of when I say Los Angeles? Oil wells. Yeah, I shouldn't really set myself up with that one. Beaches. Hollywood. Traffic, palm trees. Freeways. Those are all very common answers, and unfortunately, Los Angeles is the largest urban oil field in the nation. Approximately 580,000 Angelenos are currently living a quarter of a mile or less to an active or idle oil and gas well. I grew up in South Los Angeles in the most beautiful, vibrant community I can think of, a community where you really are family, where if my mom and I were walking home from school and we didn't have cash on us, the ice cream man would still let me buy that popsicle and I could pay him next time I saw him. If my mom and I were making breakfast and we realized we didn't have cheese for our omelet, the neighbor would give us spinach and tomato and cheese and everything to jazz up your omelet. It was family. It was a true community. I'm a very proud daughter of 2 immigrants. My mom immigrated here from Mexico and my father from Colombia. And that's something that so many immigrants lose when they come to this country. It's that unity, that sense of community. And I'm very proud to say that I grew up in that exact same space that my mom did. As I mentioned, I knew all of my neighbors except one. It was hidden behind these big, tall walls, and it was always up to my imagination what was behind it. I used to think it was a parking lot. At one point, I thought it was an amusement park and was very upset they never invited me over. I realized at the age of 9 that I wasn't invited because it was an active oil and gas well. When drilling for oil, many toxic emissions are released into the air that are harmful to one's health and our safety. It smells like rotten eggs as well. Something that the oil well in my community would do is add even more chemicals to mask the smell. So then my community would smell of chocolate. It would smell like guava, citrus, all to cover their tracks. The oil well also operates on land that is leased to them by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And that does not make them holy emissions. It is unfortunately another way that the church is abusing children. As someone that has gone to Catholic schooling her entire life, first grade through senior year of high school, it's because of the beliefs and morals that they have instilled in me that I feel like it is my duty to call them out on being hypocrites. The oil well in my community has 21 underground wells with 9 surrounding schools in the area. I grew up 30 feet from it, and it shares a wall with a daycare from newborns to 2-year-olds. It's also 30 feet from a senior living facility. It's affecting all ages of life, from beginning to end. It shares a wall with a high school for children with disabilities, such as paraplegia. Something many people don't know is that these wells operate under such immense pressure. Every 10 to 15 minutes, you have to open valves to prevent an explosion. We're living on a bomb, and there are no evacuation plans in place for the surrounding community. I remember growing up in school, we would have earthquake drills, fire drills. We even have active shooter drills. But there is no plan in place for my community despite us living on a bomb. While we were fighting for our right to breathe clean air, we were fighting for our safety as well. And in my personal experience, I got really sick. I started with a nosebleed. We brushed it off. It wasn't that big of a deal. I probably didn't drink enough water that day, or it was too hot outside, right? Until that nosebleed came back 3 times that week. Until the nosebleed got so severe, I could no longer sleep in my bed. I would have to sleep in a chair to prevent choking on my own blood at night. I developed asthma. That's something I'm always going to have to live with now. I got headaches and stomach pains, body spasms so intense I couldn't walk. My mom would have to carry me from one point to the other. That was the reality, not only for me, but for my community and for my family. It was a common conversation starter for parents to stop each other in the streets and say, "My son had an asthma attack. How's your son's asthma?" Or, "My daughter is in the emergency room. Can you help me pick up my other children from school?" The way we should be greeting each other is saying, "My daughter is going to the climate policy summit." You know, it's a completely different reality than what was going on. As a community, we were fighting 3 monsters: the oil industry, the broken regulatory system us people of color constantly have to fight, and the Archdiocese, without attacking the faith. I like to make that very clear. It was up to us to become the experts. So what do you do when your community is under attack? You stand up and you fight back. So that's exactly what we did. We co-founded, and I'm very proud to say I'm co-founder of People Not Pozos, People Not Wells, which is a grassroots campaign in my community that fights to end the oil well in my community. We started door-to-door knocking, we started storytelling and going to city hall, public comments, organizing town hall meetings, trying to raise awareness about what was going on in our very own backyards. After 4 years, we were very fortunate, 4 years, let me say that again, 4 years, We were fortunate to capture the attention of the Los Angeles Times. They wrote a story about my community, and that article captured the attention of former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer. She came out to my community and had a press conference in front of my house, childhood home, and pleaded the oil well to cease operations. I'm very proud to say, shortly after, they temporarily closed on good terms, but because they were forced because of our community pressure. I'm very, very proud to say that as of March 2020, that oil well in my community was permanently shut down. Which made it the first urban oil well to be permanently shut down in the nation. While I do and I did love being an activist at the age of 9, and I'm very proud to continue my work, at the age of 9, I really wanted to play with the Barbies I had inherited from my older sisters. I wanted to run outside and jump on trees like in the Magic Tree House, you know? I felt like I was often Hannah Montana, like living a double life, like normal kid by day but activist by night. Disney did not pick up the pilot. But I fight so my story ends with me. I fight so no future child at the age of 9 feels the need to become an activist out of survival. In 2015, I co-founded the South Central Youth Leadership Coalition. And together with Communities for a Better Environment and Youth for Environmental Justice, we successfully sued the city of Los Angeles for violation of the California Environmental Quality Act, rubber stamping, and environmental racism. This resulted in a new application itself when looking to expand or open new wells in the city, and a memorandum. And this was a monumental win because we were 14 to 17-year-olds standing on those city hall steps, demanding our city listen to us and guarantee us a livable future and city to inherit. So let's fast forward to 2020, a year that was difficult for everyone. On January 15th of 2020, I heard the words no one wants to hear. You have cancer. I was diagnosed with stage 2 reproductive cancer at the age of 19, and I was forced to choose between my reproductive system or my life. And I'm here. I went through 3 surgeries, 3 rounds of chemo, 6 weeks of radiation, 8 minor procedures, and I fought off 2 infections before I heard the words, you are cancer-free. I was diagnosed in the pandemic, which meant I had to do all of my treatments alone. My mom was only allowed with me if I was having an active anxiety attack, and it could only be for 5 minutes until I could breathe again on my own, and she would have to walk out. After my 3rd surgery, I woke up to an empty room. And that's something you never forget. The same way I lost my childhood, I lost my future. I lost the ability to become pregnant. I lost the ability to feel my first kick, to take a pregnancy test and be too scared to look at it for those 5 minutes. All before I could make those decisions for myself, which pushes me 10 times harder to fight. So again, my story ends with me. I fight because I believe every single person has a right to breathe clean air, no matter their age, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, or zip code. Clean air is a basic human right. On December 2nd, 2022, yes, dates confuse me sometimes, the Los Angeles City Council and the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to phase out all oil and gas wells in the city with a just transition. So, in a few decades, 2 decades, we will be able to say Los Angeles was the largest urban oil field in the nation. We have so much work to do, but if we unite together and we raise our fists together and we stand with each other in solidarity, we can do this. So my question to you all is, will you raise your fist in the air and stand up to end environmental racism, establish environmental justice, or will you wait until your life is the one on the line? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Stick close. We wanna, you just wait by the table there. We're going to bring Nalleli back after our next couple speakers, do a little interactive Q&A. I just want to reflect for a moment. It's a very emotional moment in the room. I know a lot of us feel what was just said, and let's remember what we're fighting for. If there was ever a moment for me to remember what we're fighting for, and we talk about policies, and we talk about numbers, and we talk about the grid, but we're talking about human lives, and we're talking about people. And so thank you, Nalleli, so much for reminding us what it is that we're doing here and why we're here today. Truly inspiring. You asked Ellie, you asked Lauren Sanchez, what gives you hope? Nalleli, you give me hope. So thank you very much. All right. So our next speaker is, congratulations on the best spot on the agenda right after Nalleli. That's no, but this is another great speaker. We're continuing on this theme of justice. Dr. Michael Mendez, Assistant Professor of Environmental Planning and Policy at UC Irvine. He's an Andrew Carnegie Fellow. He's also written a book, Climate Change from the Streets, providing an urgent and timely analysis of the contentious politics of incorporating environmental justice into global climate change policy. To talk more about that, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Michael Mendez. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here and to follow such an important narrative and story that Nalleli presents, and really having a human-centered approach to climate change policy and science. And rather than speak about science, which we're going to hear about a lot during our various breakout sessions later in the day, I wanted to stay on this human-centered approach and talk about the human aspects of climate change, those embodied and lived experiences that we just heard so passionately about very moments ago, and really think about the historical nature of the fight for to end environmental racism and to promote environmental justice in our climate change policy. We often pat ourselves on the back here in California as being the leaders, but there's been significant conflict over how we conceptualize climate change, how we end this environmental racism and move towards justice. And one of my research really focuses on worldviews and values. And for example, how we conceptualize climate change. If we look at this picture from this flyer from a community-based environmental justice organization in West Oakland, California, it's really trying to decenter this idea that climate change is out there in the wilderness, affecting only ecological systems, polar bears, and melting ice caps. This is maybe a tired image for us now, but nearly 15 years ago, it was a real fight to center back on people. And as you will notice from the flyer here, it reads, it's not just about polar bears. Climate justice is about youth and the future of Oakland. And look how they're emphasizing not only intergenerational solidarity, but the individual, the way they spell youth as Y-O-U. And then one of the West Oakland Environmental Indicators project leaders told me that up until recently, this fight for climate change really focuses again on these abstract impacts, abstract science about these climate impacts happening out there in the wilderness, and not about everyday people that are focusing on the everyday fights around climate change and to end environmental racism. Next slide, please. So in California, having these ideas of more representative types of images is quite important. As we know, here in California, we're experiencing a major climate change crisis and a historic racial unrest. In the last several years, millions of people have been impacted by multiple disasters, fires, blackouts, heat waves, drought, and hazardous air quality, and of course, the ever-present COVID-19 pandemic. These compounding of disasters have cascading health, social, and economic impacts, and due to existing structural inequality, these impacts are disproportionately affecting low-income people of color. And what is occurring in the field of public health, they call these cascading and compounding impacts a syndemic. To address the climate emergency, activists and policymakers proposed the Green New Deal at the federal level. Many of you know this as a radical proposal to decarbonize our economy and address poverty and inequality. However, for the last 2 decades, low-income communities of color have also pushed state and local governments to experiment with reducing greenhouse gas emissions and approaches that also address inequality and public health. These efforts in climate experimentation have been contentious and are often met with significant resistance. While I'm supportive of the Green New Deal, I'm here to say that there's nothing new about the Green New Deal. Climate change experiments in places like California since the year 2003 have been all-out street fights. Environmental justice activists are often pitted against traditional environmentalists that have historically favored the least costly mitigation solutions, which do not necessarily maximize equity and public health outcomes in low-income communities of color. These conflicts over climate change are cultural at their core. They illustrate that although the science of climate change is clear, policy decisions about how to respond to their effects remain contentious. Even when such decisions are claimed to be guided by objective knowledge, they are made and implemented through political institutions and relationships and all the competing interests, power, and racial struggles that this implies. So if we look towards the example of California, it reveals the contingent nature of climate change policy and science. The assumptions and social, political, and cultural attitudes that often create conflict between community understandings of local environmental conditions and the prevailing global top-down conceptualization of climate change. In California, tensions between differing approaches to address climate change are often centered on the politics of scale, economics, class, and race. These differences in worldview, if unacknowledged, can lead to the breakdown of trust even among groups that are nominally working towards the same goal, reducing the harm that climate change would do to human societies and our planet. So, for insight into national level conflicts between groups working on climate change solutions, one should look to the nearly 2-decade California experiment of incorporating environmental justice and health equity principles into climate change policy. For environmental justice activists in California, the main threat from climate change is the disproportionate harm it causes their bodies and the health of their communities. For them, climate change is not just about global greenhouse gas models. Rather, it's also about the opposing worldviews through which policy and science is seen. Yet in California, it's still often seen as this homogeneous entity that uniformly values environmentalism and climate action. This image universalizes the idea of climate change and detaches it from its cultural settings. It also obscures how the localization of environmental policy and science within the state involves processes of conflict and legitimacy. For example, if you look at this book that was published by a major university press, it won major awards. It details itself, it describes itself as the definitive book on California's environmental history, from the founding of Yosemite to modern climate change programs established here in California. And this 300-page book, people of color are only mentioned twice, and it's really done in passing. So there's this traditional environmental narrative of California that facilitates the erasure of people and enacting comprehensive environmental policy and climate change. Therefore, I published my book, Climate Change from the Streets, with this explicit focus on people of color, and it foregrounds people, place, and power in the context of climate change and inequality. And this work is really focused on my experience working in the California State Legislature during a 15-year period. This provided me valuable insight into how the interactions of governments, businesses, and NGOs shape climate change policy. And moreover, my experience is also rooted in growing up with environmental racism. As a youth in places like Pacoima, Lakeview Terrace, and Sylmar, I was surrounded by people resisting environmental racism. Whether protesting the siting of landfills or organizing to demand the cleanup of toxic properties, they sought to understand how these situations originated, to imagine new environmental futures. So this has focused my work really on what the conceptualization of environmental justice and climate change has meant to activists, policymakers, and experts and scholars alike. So just a really quick note, while much of our work here has focused on the aspects of climate change mitigation and a prospective idea how we can slow down climate change, we really need to acknowledge that the impacts of climate change are happening now, more frequent and severe, and are disproportionately affecting some of the most socially vulnerable and stigmatized communities. This is some of the new research that I did with environmental justice groups in the Central Coast of California that shows how wildfires in particular are disproportionately infecting low-income communities, and specifically Latino and indigenous undocumented migrants. So this has had a great impact in promoting convergence research, and we were able to highlight some of these disparate impacts from extreme wildfire events to regulatory agencies such as FEMA, NOAA, CAO, OES, and of course the United Nations Migration Agency. And then finally, we're also expanding our research to look at other socially vulnerable communities that are not traditionally thought of being impacted by climate change impacts, such as the LGBTQ population, where we're showing how exposures to disasters are disproportionately affecting them both legally, psychologically, and even theologically. And we've had great success in moving this forward in terms of FEMA, national press, as well as NOAA and other scientific institutions. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to engaging in this panel discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. So we will be collecting questions, and we'll have an opportunity for a couple of questions right after our next speaker. Our next speaker is Joe Sullivan. And just so I get it right, I got to put my glasses on. Old eyes don't see so good. Joe Sullivan is the Director of Energy Solutions and Workforce Engagement for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 11 and the National Electrical Contractors Association of Greater LA. So as a voice for the workers, please welcome Joe Sullivan.
Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here. As you mentioned, I'm Joe Sullivan, IBEW Local 11, National Electrical Contractors Association of Greater Los Angeles. This represents approximately 400 electrical contractors that employ about 10,000 union electricians. So as people have mentioned, we are in the midst of a revolution in terms of our power sector, transportation sector, and it's a great opportunity to create jobs. We are going to need 12.5 million electric cars by 2035. We currently have 1.5 million. We currently have, I think, 80,000 charging stations in the state. By 2030, we're going to need 1.2 million. We know that all of our vehicles sold in California in 2035 are going to be all electric, and our grid or our power sector is going to be 100% renewable by 2045. So we're going to have to build wind and solar 5 times faster than we are up to this point. We are going to need 4 times more renewable energy. And so we are going to have to expand our grid and our infrastructure significantly for this. And to date, we've seen brownouts. And so there are high stakes to doing this right and to making sure that we build public trust and these jobs are done correctly. But another opportunity in all this is we have the chance to create high road careers that lift up communities, that include inclusion, that employ people from frontline communities that are environmentally impacted. But this isn't guaranteed. This won't just happen. A middle class, high road careers, target populations, this requires interventions. This requires policy. There's a wonderful framework in place for how to do this. It's called Putting California on the High Road a Jobs and Climate Action Plan for 2030. It was authored by the UC Berkeley Environment, Labor, and Education, UC Berkeley Labor, Research, and Education, and it was commissioned by the California Workforce Development Board at the direction of the state legislature per AB 398. And there were three main outcomes from this High Road Jobs Report. One is that labor should be considered an investment, not a cost. We achieve greater social equity in the labor market outcomes for disadvantaged workers and communities when policymakers pay attention to job quality and identify high-quality careers that pay family-sustaining wages. And deliberate policy interventions are necessary in order to advance job quality and social equity as California transitions to a carbon-neutral economy. So, in other words, high road careers, middle class, and equity don't just magically happen. They require leadership, they require policy. The action plan describes what a good job is. It's things like paying family-sustaining wages, benefits, proper worker classification, paid sick time, chances for increased wages with increased skills, safety, etc., career opportunities for advancement. But the plan states that short-term training programs aimed at new green jobs or specific energy technologies or sectors do not necessarily help workers. Training does not create jobs that ensure graduates have job placement. To be effective, training strategies must connect directly to the labor market, explicitly addressing industry needs and connecting participants to actual jobs. A comprehensive study was done on energy efficiency projects in California. 2/3 of the work for the energy efficiency was performed, can be performed, or is performed by traditional construction trades, such as electricians, pipe fitters, sheet metal workers, etc. About 1/6 of the jobs are existing professional occupations, engineers, people like that. And only about 2% required specialized training. So we're talking 2%, and quite often you'll hear leadership talk about we need jobs training. That's not necessarily the case. What I've found, and I think what a lot of people have found, that what really takes these green jobs and turns them into wonderful careers is apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is the alchemy that transitions these into a wonderful lifelong career. A little bit about our apprenticeship program at IBEW Nika in Los Angeles. We have 4 classifications: inside wire persons, outside wire persons, sound and communications, and residential. The inside wire person is by far the biggest. It's a 5-year program. They earn money while they learn. They earn under the mentorship of journey persons. They have mentors in terms of outreach coordinators and instructors. Students don't pay for anything for the education. They don't pay for books or tools. They even receive a voucher for books. We invest about $30,000 per student, so it's essentially a free scholarship. It's 98% privately funded. They are placed on jobs. They're only brought in to be put on jobs. And there are clear benchmarks for advancement. They receive raises every 6 months. They know what they have to achieve. Everybody gets paid the same. There's no discrimination. Doesn't matter race, gender, creed, etc. And there are clear career ladders. You could become a journey person, a foreman, a general foreman, a superintendent, an electrical contractor. You can specialize in something like instrumentation. There are a lot of different ways to go. And when inside wire persons graduate as journey persons, they receive they have 3 pensions. After their 4 month, they have medical, dental, vision, and prescription drugs. And what we've done at our training center is we've continued to upgrade our curriculum as the market has changed. About 15 years ago, we started doing solar training. We offer training around EV infrastructure. We offer training around automated demand response, advanced lighting controls. We offer training now around energy storage and microgrid systems. And this is in addition to the 5-year education they're already receiving. Once someone graduates, they have a journey person card that they can work anywhere in the United States. And it's taught at a net zero emissions facility that doubles as a living laboratory. So beyond this, we also have a dedicated outreach apparatus. We have a full-time outreach coordinator that goes into communities that are underrepresented. We have a full-time veterans outreach coordinator who recruits veterans. We partner along with the building trades with community groups like the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, Helmets to Hard Hats, women in non-traditional employment roles. We have several hundred previously incarcerated individuals in our program. And so we have the apparatus in place. We don't necessarily need a lot of green job training. What we need are the policies to ensure that we are creating these high road careers. And these policies can be things like paying prevailing wage, skills requirements, skilled and trained workforce, community benefits agreement. When we are giving out public funds as incentives, there should be workforce strings attached to these to lift up these communities and create the high road careers. So that's my time. Thank you.
So as we're regathering, we do have time for just a couple of questions before we hear from one of our local hosts from SMUD. But I want to start with a question for you, Dr. Mendez. How do you think, what are the most important things we need to change to ensure that a broader coalition of voices are heard when we formulate California climate policy?
Great, thank you, excellent question. Again, it's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists. Some of the key things is really trying to move away from that deficit model idea that experts, scientists, and even policymakers know best in terms of what is climate change, and having more of that human, people, neighborhood-centered approach, and bringing in distinct voices, distinct knowledge from those that are first and hardest hit from climate change, and creating processes that this knowledge, these metrics, the laws are co-produced together among these various experts and community experts. So I think first and foremost is focusing on community knowledge and bringing them into the scientific process and also the political policy process.
So you're saying we need to elect Nalleli to high government office. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. All right. I agree. Nalleli, a question for you. Thank you for your work. Tell us, what are you focusing your efforts on now?
I'm working to start my own nonprofit, hopefully this year. I just pivoting off the last question, I run for president in 2036, so slipping that in there.
That's right.
And this year it's working, again, number one will always be to stay cancer-free, but holding our elected officials accountable. Just because this has been signed, it doesn't mean that we need to apply pressure so they start and they prioritize the frontline communities, the wells closest to homes, and begin phasing them out today, not in 5 or 10 years, but so much can happen within the span of 10 years. In my experience, from nosebleeds and asthma to cancer at 19, that was a 10-year gap. So working and applying pressure on our elected officials to start phasing them out and maintaining that pressure.
Right, so just the agreement is not enough. We want to see the action on the ground.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much for that. Joe, yes, applause. Joe, question about prevailing wage agreements. Like, the question is, do you support prevailing wage agreements, and is that because there aren't enough union members currently to do the work? I mean, because prevailing wage and, higher union only are kind of different approaches. So what's your thoughts about this question we got from the audience?
Well, yes, I support prevailing wage, and prevailing wage is required on government projects. Mm-hmm. And no, prevailing wage is not union only. In fact, our project labor agreements are not union only. Prevailing wage just essentially levels the playing field in terms of union and non-union in some people's eyes. But it requires minimum standards for what you will pay for workforce.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer. Sort of a different question back to you, Joe. What do we need to do to scale the apprenticeship programs to meet the needs of California's clean and renewable energy goals? Like, how do we really ramp this thing up?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I want to say, right now we have the largest apprenticeship program in the nation in Los Angeles. We have 2,000 apprentices. And it went from about 1,200 to 2,000 in about, I want to say 3 years' time. So we can scale pretty quickly in terms of having the facilities, in terms of having the curriculum, the instructors. Now, in different parts of the country, it might be somewhat different. But right now, we've done some pretty detailed studies in terms of what workforce is required to install EV infrastructure to meet those numbers, as well as the workforce to install, for example, solar, like utility-scale solar projects. And we have existing workforce. In fact, right now, work's a tad slow because of things like switchgear, because of price increases. So there's actually available workforce. But workforce does go up and down. Apprenticeship in construction trades, they are designed, though, to be fluid and to adapt to the market.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge we're going to have time for one or two more quick questions. And in case of all of our panels, we could have spoken a lot longer. I want to thank all of you for all of your excellent questions and apologize for the ones we haven't been able to get to. But I do have a couple more questions, one for Dr. Mendez, and then I'm going to end with you, Nalleli. Dr. Mendez, a lot of legislation regarding electrifying California centers on homeowners, right? But particularly in disadvantaged communities, a lot of people are renters. So what kind of policies and legislation do you think we really need to be fighting for to help take care of renters, which is a big part of the community that we're discussing right now?
Another excellent question, but we need to think larger about infrastructure equity. It's not just about the electrification of our homes and our communities, but it's also shoring up other critical and key infrastructure to protect some of the most vulnerable communities. We saw that recently with extreme storms and flooding throughout California, some of the hardest hit, again, undocumented migrants. So we need to take a wholesale review of how we're assessing critical infrastructure, from the priority deployment of new technologies to the funding, and ensuring that it's done in a more equitable manner. Because again, we see from Pájaro to Planeta to Larry that these key infrastructures and the funding that's been deployed for them are not being distributed for the most part equitably. So from electrification to infrastructure of our transportation systems to safeguarding levees as well, we need to think holistically about how we assess priority projects and funding.
Great, thank you so much. Nalleli, the last question for you. As you look out on this room, you see a lot of potential allies, right? We've got business leaders, government leaders, elected officials, activists, nonprofit leaders, CEOs. Tell us, what can we do to support your struggle?
Great question, and also no pressure on being the last question. Listening to frontline communities, uplifting frontline communities. Nobody knows our stories better than us. I think a lot of times we get distracted on what can we do, what can we do, what can I give, what can I support, and sometimes the best tool is just listening. It's giving up your platform and allowing somebody else to share their story. It's allowing our lived experiences, our experience period from being a community member, and sharing that and allowing us the space to do so truthfully and authentically. I know that my story is not the easiest to hear, but if I can live it, other people can hear it. And that's something we need to remember. And I think that's what the most important things is listening and giving that support and appreciation and love to our frontline community members.
Heard. Thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you. Please give one more a warm welcome and thank you to our great speakers on justice and jobs, Nalleli Cobo, Michael Mendez, and Joe Sullivan. Thank you all so much. Awesome, thank you. I'd like to invite Rob Kurth to the stage. Rob, there you are. So we've got one more speaker and then a couple of quick announcements before we move on. Director Rob Kurth is the director of Ward 5 of SMUD. SMUD is keeping our lights on right now. We're here in Sacramento. I'm going to throw a couple quick numbers at you. Rob is a former Sacramento City Council member. He's a 2-term SMUD director. He's also a 3rd-generation Sacramentan who lives less than 3 blocks from his childhood home right here in Sacramento. So please welcome Rob Kurth. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'm part of the SMUD board. There's 7 of us. We're individually elected. We run for campaigns the old-fashioned way, and we think we run one of the most progressive utilities in the country. So I represent Midtown, Downtown, North Sacramento, Natomas, Rio Linda, and Alberta. I gotta say, I'm excited to be here, and I have to say humbled, because you're the generation of leaders who are going to finally get carbon out of all of our systems. I know it's a tall order, but it's the stage is set. We need to thank the earlier, the leaders, right? The inventors, the entrepreneurs, all the people who run the on-the-ground companies that have set this stage for us that we can make this happen. The cost of renewables in the last 15 years has dropped almost 90%. And so that means that across the country, coal plants are closing down because they just can't compete. We're seeing gas plants throttled way back because the cost of the energy that they produce exceeds that of the solar, of the wind, of the geothermal, of all the great energy technologies that are out there. Because of all this hard work, really, renewables are surging, and they're not slowing down even now. The traditional generators just can't compete. So in 2018, the SMUD Board of Directors acknowledged the obvious and declared a climate emergency. And we turned over to our staff to ask them, what are you going to do about it? So they, of course, very clever people. They realized this urgency, sensed it, and they also saw the stage that was set. And they've come up with what we think is the most ambitious carbon reduction plan in the country for a large utility. We'll be at carbon zero by 2030. We hope it can be a national model. We'll see if anybody can beat us, and I'm hoping they do. But, so first off, how do we do that? What's the roadmap here? And by the way, the roadmap's on our website. I won't get to all of it in the little bit of time I have left. First off is storage. We've just opened our first utility-scale storage facility in South Sacramento, and we've partnered with ESS for a long-duration energy storage system. It's a flow battery system, which is salt water plus sort of iron-rich salts in it. The first will add 200 megawatts of of storage to our system. Now, in there's a word I slipped in there, long duration, which you should notice. That's an important word. What it allows us to do is not just shift energy around the clock, but it allows it to shift us around the calendar. So we can store up energy in one season when renewables are really abundant and pass them on to a different season where they're harder to come by. Now, we talk a lot about megawatts and kilowatts and gigawatts and things like that, which I think to most folks are kind of technobabble. Who here has ever driven an old Volkswagen? See a few hands. All right, that sense of dread you feel when the hill is coming and you're hoping to get up over the hill. So now imagine 40 old Volkswagens trying to get up a hill all at once with your foot clear to the floor. That's 1 megawatt. And so when we start talking about adding 200 megawatts, it's pretty easy to imagine really almost 8,000 Volkswagens trying to get up the hill all at once to produce that 200 megawatts. And that's what the geniuses who we're relying on have come forward with. They figured out how to get rid of all that internal combustion engine and replace it with these just this miracle of storage and these renewables that are coming everywhere. So I'm probably about out of time here. I see by my little clock. So storage, also on the SMUD roadmap is another 100 megawatts of wind. We're replacing our old turbines with the new ones. They're 500 feet across. They're 600 feet tall. They're far bigger than the tallest building here in downtown Sacramento. And we're adding almost 10 times that in new solar. We can get there. We can as a community, as a utility, as a community, as a country get there, we can't do it without each of you and without all the folks you can influence. So at every chance you can, conserve a little energy and figure out how to switch to figure out how to stop burning. You should have all bought your last gas car, your last gas appliance, and all the things that we've been throwing into the air for so long. So with that, thanks from SMUD for being here. Thanks for being so wonderful and making this happen for all of us. Bye now.
We really appreciate SMUD's leadership, as well as all of the other CCAs and municipal utilities that are part of this climate fight. Before I ask you to remove your colored ticket that is inside, I'm gonna demonstrate here. We've got our little colored tickets that say on them what kind of food you're going to have. And you're going to place that where it is that you would want to eat. We're going to eat right here in this room. So place that ticket in front of you, and that way the staff will know what entree to bring you. Speaking of the staff, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that, we thank our sponsors and we thank our speakers, but working tirelessly since early this morning to make sure that we're all taken care of and that we're all fed are the workers here at the Holiday Inn. So I just want to thank them here. From Unite Here Local number 49, these are the people who are making it happen for us. So thank you all very much for your hard work. We wouldn't be able to do it without you. We'd all be very hungry if you weren't here. So thank you so much. We really appreciate the staff also here in the hotel, the cleaning staff. Let's not remember that there's real people making all this happen. A couple last things I want to mention. Thanks again for all the great questions. By the way, if you are a vegan and you ask for a vegetarian meal, you're covered. The vegetarian meals also happen to be vegan meals, so no extra ticket required. I do need to mention one other really important thing. At 1:15, at the conclusion of lunch, this room is going to get partitioned into several breakout rooms. And so at that point, we're going to need to get everybody out of this room. It's a great time to go visit the bidirectional charging exhibit in the parking lot, go talk to our various sponsors at their tables, pick up some additional swag, schmooze, make a new friend, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to happen here at 1:15. And at the end of the reception tonight, remember from 5 to 6:30, we'll be having a reception right here. Please feel free to take the centerpieces home with you, plant them in the ground as a living memory of our time together. So now it's time for lunch, so thank you all. Make sure you get your tickets out on the table so they know what entree to bring you, and we'll be back at 1:30 in our breakout sessions. If you have any questions, ask anybody from the Climate Center staff. Thank you.